The last lamp in Mallowden Manor was burning before the bride had been welcomed, before a single ribbon had been untied from her wedding gown, and before the Duke who had married her could bring himself to ask whether she was afraid. October had come early to Hampshire that year, laying a damp silver mist over the lanes and turning every bare branch into a black line against the dusk. By the time the ducal carriage reached the long avenue of Mallowden, Isolde Marchwin, newly Isolde Aveline, Duchess of Brackenholt, had folded her gloved hands so tightly in her lap that the pearl stitching had pressed marks into her palms. She did not complain of the cold. She did not say that the chapel incense still clung to her throat, or that the journey had drawn a thin pain through her ribs each time the wheels struck a rut. She merely sat beside her husband, pale and upright, while Leopold Aveline, Duke of Brackenholt, watched the dark shape of the manor appear through the glass. There should have been light in the windows. Even a house shut for economy showed a glow in the servants' wing when its master brought home a bride. Mallowden showed almost nothing. One weak flame wavered somewhere near the rear offices, and the rest of the great front remained blind. Leopold's mouth tightened, not with surprise, but with the satisfaction of a man whose arrangements had been obeyed. "It will be quiet," he said at last. His voice was low, cultured, and careful. It had the polish of generations trained never to sound uncertain. That was thought best. Isolde turned her face toward him. In the grey carriage light, she looked younger than 27, though not in the way society praised. Her delicacy was not the ornamental softness of a debutante. It was the drawn fineness of someone who had learned to move through weakness without permitting it to become spectacle. "By whom, Your Grace?" The title sat between them like a locked door. Leopold looked at her then, properly looked, but only for a moment. "Those acquainted with your condition." "I see." She lowered her gaze before he could mistake the answer for rebellion. In truth, she saw very little. She saw the manor rising ahead like a house that had decided against her. She saw the man beside her, her husband of 6 hours, already retreating behind duty. She saw, reflected faintly in the window, the white edge of her own bridal bonnet and the face beneath it. Too composed to be pitied and too tired to be believed, the carriage stopped beneath the stone portico. No line of servants waited. No housekeeper stood with curtsy prepared. No footmen held lanterns on either side of the steps. No cheerful disorder of arrival warmed the cold ceremony of the place. After a delay just long enough to become humiliating, the front door opened. An elderly woman in a black gown and cap appeared with one candle, followed by a footman whose livery hung a little loose at the shoulders. Leopold descended first. He offered Isolde his hand because breeding required it. She accepted because breeding required that too. His palm was warm through his glove. Hers was cold. The contact lasted only long enough for her to step down. And yet something in her traitorous heart marked it as the first kindness of her marriage, though it had contained no tenderness at all. "Mrs. Fenlo," Leopold said. "Your Grace." The housekeeper curtsied deeply, first to him then to Isolde. Her eyes lingered on the bride's face with an expression so quickly hidden that Isolde almost missed it. Not disdain, not welcome, alarm. "The rooms are prepared as instructed." Leopold nodded. "Her Grace is to have every quiet." "Yes, Your Grace." Mrs. Fenlo's fingers tightened around the candlestick. Isolde heard the words as though from a distance. Every quiet. Not comfort, not attendance, not welcome, quiet. The entrance hall smelled of Holland covers, cold stone, and extinguished fires. White sheets draped the furniture in long, ghostly shapes. Portraits stared from the walls above them, Aveline faces dimmed by dust and ancestral judgment. A marble table stood beneath the staircase, with a silver salver upon it, empty but for 2 calling cards, both old enough to have curled at the edges, somewhere far away. A door shut with the timid care of a servant who had been taught that sound itself might offend. Isolde fought the urge to cough. The effort made her eyes sting, but she held still until the tightness passed. Leopold had noticed her silence. That was worse than if he had noticed the pain. "You should rest," he said. "The journey was long." "As you wish." A faint line appeared between his brows. Perhaps he had expected gratitude. Perhaps he had expected tears. A sickly bride, installed in a remote manor, ought to be grateful for peace. Lady Drusilla Khan had said as much the week before the wedding. With her ivory smile and her hand resting lightly on Leopold's sleeve, Isolde had heard only fragments then, standing half-screened by a potted palm in Lady Khan's drawing room, but fragments were often enough to wound. Poor Miss Marchwin cannot bear commotion. A full household would distress her. She has always been inclined to nerves. Rest is the kindest prison, when one has not the strength for freedom. Isolde had not answered then. She did not answer now. Leopold removed his gloves. "I must return to London for several matters that cannot be delayed. The estate office has been instructed. Mrs. Fenlo will see that you are not troubled." For the first time, the housekeeper looked down. Isolde felt the hall tilt, not from illness, though weakness rose quickly when emotion found no safe outlet. "You are leaving tonight?" "Before dawn." He said it gently, which somehow made it colder. "There are parliamentary calls, settlements to complete, and accounts requiring review. Mallowden is the healthier place for you. Healthier, in that sheeted, silent house. Then I hope your journey is safe." His gaze sharpened. She wondered if he heard the restraint beneath the courtesy, or only the courtesy itself. "If you require anything, you may apply to Mrs. Fenlo or to Pithwick at the estate office." "Of course. You will not be expected to receive callers." "No. And the staff has been reduced so that there will be no unnecessary disturbance there." It was. The explanation for the empty hall, the missing voices, the strange alarm in Mrs. Fenlo's eyes. Isolde turned slightly and looked through the open door toward the servants' passage beyond the screen. There, mounted on the wall, hung a long wooden household name board. She had seen such boards in other houses, each peg marked for a servant, each name a small declaration that the house was alive and ordered. This one had rows of empty holes. Only a handful of pegs remained: Mrs. Fenlo, Reeve, Mary, Alice, James. The rest were gone, not turned, not moved to indicate duty elsewhere. Gone. Leopold did not follow her gaze. "I trust you will find the quiet restorative." "Quiet has many uses, Your Grace." "Indeed." He reached for his hat from the footman. "Good night, Duchess." Not Isolde, Duchess. The rank remained when the woman herself had not yet been admitted. She curtsied, because she would not let him see that the word had struck. "Good night, Your Grace." He paused, as though something in him had nearly changed its mind. It did not. Within minutes, his steps had crossed the hall again. Orders were murmured. A carriage door closed outside. Wheels rolled over gravel, slow at first, then fading down the avenue until the sound became indistinguishable. From the damp wind pressing against the house, Isolde stood very still. No one spoke. Mrs. Fenlo, the 2 maids, and the footman waited with the dreadful patience of servants who had been told too much and permitted to say nothing. At last, Isolde lifted her chin. "Mrs. Fenlo, Has supper been served below stairs? The question seemed to startle the woman more than tears would have done. Below stairs, Your Grace. Yes. Has everyone eaten? There is bread and a little broth. Isolde looked again at the sheeted hall, at the empty salver, at the missing pegs. Then we shall begin there tomorrow. Tonight, please show me the room where the household books are kept. Mrs. Fenlo hesitated. Your Grace, His Grace said you were to rest. His Grace said I was not to be troubled. Isolde allowed herself the smallest breath. Hunger is trouble. Unpaid wages are trouble. A house that whispers is trouble. A ledger is merely paper. The footman lowered his eyes quickly, but not before she saw something like hope move across his face. Mrs. Fenlo curtsied again, this time less from habit than from decision. This way, Your Grace. They crossed the hall slowly. Isolde would not hurry and prove weakness. She would not lean on the banister and invite pity. Yet by the time they reached the old music room, her lungs burned. Mrs. Fenlo opened the door, and a faint smell of dust and lavender escaped. Moonlight touched a covered pianoforte. A cabinet stood near the window, its glass cracked in one corner. On the sill beside it rested a porcelain window lamp, its base painted with two small swallows in flight. One wing was crossed by a thin fracture, dark with age. That was her late Grace's. Mrs. Fenlo said softly. The Duke's mother. Yes, Your Grace. She liked a light in the window when His Grace was a boy, said a house should never look as though no one was expected. Isolde looked at the two painted swallows, one whole, one cracked. Something moved inside her then, not grief exactly, and not courage. For courage was often too grand a name for simply continuing. Is there oil? Mrs. Fenlo's expression tightened. A little. Then we shall use a little. Your Grace should not trouble with it. Isolde removed her gloves. Her fingers trembled when she took the lamp, but she held it steady. Mrs. Fenlo, tonight I entered this house as a bride and found no light in the front windows. No servant should return from an errand to such a sight. No traveller should pass and think, Mallowden has no living soul within it. She adjusted the wick with more care than skill. The flame caught, small and golden, reflected twice in the cracked glass. If the house must be quiet, it need not be dead. Mrs. Fenlo said nothing. The silence had changed. Isolde carried the lamp to the highest front window of the music room and set it there, where its glow trembled above the dark lawn and the empty avenue down which the Duke had vanished. For a moment, her strength failed enough that she had to press her fingertips to the sill. She let the weakness pass through her without bowing to it. Then she turned back toward the room, toward the covered furniture, the closed books, the housekeeper, watching with wet eyes she refused to shed. Tomorrow, Isolde said, we shall put back as many names as we can. As she stepped toward the door, her slipper brushed something small on the floor beside the servants' passage. The footman stooped, then stopped, uncertain whether he had permission. Isolde bent before he could object and picked it up herself. It was a wooden peg, dusty at the edges, the lettering still plain beneath her thumb. Cook, dismissed by economy order. She closed her fingers around it. Outside, the lamp burned on in the window, a single fragile answer to the dark. By morning, the single lamp in the upper window had burned low enough to leave a brown rim on the glass chimney. But it had not gone out. Isolde woke in a bed too large for one woman and too cold for a bridal chamber, with the taste of smoke faint on her tongue and the wooden name peg still lying on the small table beside her candle. Cook, dismissed by economy order. The words looked harmless in daylight. That was the cruelty of paper. It could make a dismissal sound like prudence, a silence sound like mercy, and a bride's abandonment sound like care. She dressed without ringing, partly because she did not yet know whether the bell would be answered, and partly because pride had become a habit long before marriage gave it a title. Her maid, Alice, arrived breathless with apologies just as Isolde fastened the last hook of her morning gown. The girl looked no more than 19, with red fingers from cold water and a cap tied too hastily beneath her chin. "Your Grace, I'm sorry." "Mrs. Fenlo said you were not to be disturbed before 9. "And what hour is it?" "8:30, Your Grace." "Then you have not disturbed me. You have obeyed an instruction and arrived early enough to be useful." Alice blinked, as if no one had ever made room for both obedience and kindness in the same sentence. Isolde picked up the wooden peg and placed it in her reticule. "Please ask Mrs. Fenlo and Mr. Reeve to meet me in the servants' passage. Not in the drawing room. Not in the breakfast room. There." Alice hesitated. "The servants' passage, Your Grace." "Yes. If names have been removed from that wall, we shall begin at the wall." The passage was colder than the hall. Narrow windows admitted a grey English light, and the floor had been scrubbed so often that the stone showed a pale path down the middle. The household name board hung near the door to the back stairs, a long polished plank with neat rows of holes and only 5 pegs standing where a full household should have had dozens. Mrs. Fenlo waited beside it, rigid with discipline. Thomas Reeve stood a little behind her, young, serious, and poorly slept, holding a ledger against his chest as if it were both shield and confession. The footman James hovered near the baize door. The 2 maids, Alice and Mary, kept close together. Isolde counted them, 5 servants visible, 1 under steward, a manor that should have held cooks, scullery maids, laundry maids, housemaids, footmen, grooms, gardeners, a butler, perhaps a still-room maid, perhaps more. Mallowden had not been quieted. It had been emptied. "Mrs. Fenlo," Isolde said, "how many servants were in the household at Michaelmas?" The housekeeper's eyes flickered toward Thomas Reeve. 26, Your Grace, counting stable and garden staff attached to the house. And now, 6 in regular indoor service, Your Grace, 3 outside, though only 1 groom remains in the stable full-time. Who dismissed them? No one answered. The house seemed to listen. Isolde let the silence lengthen until it became less comfortable for falsehood than for truth. At last, Thomas opened the ledger. "The orders came through the estate office, Your Grace. They bore Sir Algernon Pithwick's hand, but they stated they were issued under His Grace's authority." "For what reason?" Mrs. Fenlo answered this time, her voice lower, in preparation for her Grace's quiet condition. The words had been polished by repetition. Isolde heard Lady Drusilla in them, quiet condition. Not illness, which might invite compassion, not weakness, which might require care. Condition. A phrase that turned a woman into a problem to be managed. "May I see the orders?" Thomas looked almost relieved to have something concrete to do. He opened the ledger on a narrow shelf beneath the board. Several folded memoranda lay between the pages, each creased with official care. Isolde read the first: reduced kitchen staff necessary to preserve silence in the East Wing. She read the second: no additional callers to be admitted without estate approval, as Lady Aveline is not to be fatigued. Her gaze stopped. Lady Aveline. The title was wrong. Before her marriage, she had been Miss Marchwin. After it, she was Her Grace, the Duchess of Brackenholt, or the Duchess in ordinary household reference. Lady Aveline was a careless invention, the sort of error made by someone who understood rank as performance, but not as law. She did not smile. Satisfaction was too early, and triumph would have been indecent before people who had lost wages. Mr. Reeve, who received these. I did, your grace. Sir Algernon sent them sealed from the estate office. When I questioned the number of dismissals, he told me the Duke had no wish to have his bride distressed by unnecessary movement. Did his grace sign any of them? No, your grace, not these copies. Copies? Thomas's mouth tightened. Sir Algernon retained the originals. Isolde folded the memorandum once and set it aside. Then we shall make our own copies, with dates, names, and the person who received each order. Mrs. Fenlo, who was the cook? The housekeeper's composure wavered. Mrs. Barden, your grace, 21 years in the house. Was she dismissed for fault? No, your grace, economy. The last word tasted bitter even in another woman's mouth. Isolde removed the wooden peg from her reticule. I found this last night. Mrs. Fenlo reached for it, then stopped before touching. I wondered where it had gone. Put it back. The housekeeper looked at her fully then. Your grace, Mrs. Barden is not here. Was she disgraced? No. Dead? No, thank heaven. Then her name has not earned removal. Put it back until truth decides where it belongs. Mrs. Fenlo took the peg with hands that trembled once, just once, before discipline steadied them. She pressed it into an empty hole. The sound was small, a wooden click against polished board. Yet every servant in the passage seemed to breathe differently afterward. Isolde turned to Thomas. How much is owed in wages? He swallowed. 3 weeks to the indoor staff, 5 to some of the outdoor men. Mrs. Barden was promised a quarter's recommendation and received none. Is there money in the household account? There should be. That is not an answer. Colour rose in his face. I have not been permitted to see the full account since Sir Algernon reduced the staff. Then we shall begin with what can be seen. Food first, coal second, bedding third, wages accounted if not yet paid. Nobody in this house is to go hungry, because my health has been made an excuse for another person's economy. Mary, the younger maid, made a soft sound and covered it with a cough. Isolde looked at her. Have you eaten this morning? Yes, your grace. The answer came too quickly. Isolde turned to Mrs. Fenlo. Has she? The housekeeper closed her eyes briefly. Bread, your grace. Bread is not breakfast for a working maid in October. Mrs. Fenlo bowed her head. No, your grace. Isolde felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the warning that emotion and cold together would demand payment from her body. She held the edge of the shelf until it passed. When she spoke again, her voice remained calm. Mrs. Fenlo, please have broth warmed for the staff before any tray is sent to me. If there are eggs, they are to go below stairs first. I will take tea and toast in the music room. Alice stared at her as if she had overturned Parliament. Your Grace, you can't mean before your own breakfast. I can, and I do. Mrs. Fenlo's curtsy was deeper than the instruction required. Yes, Your Grace. The morning widened into work. Not dramatic work. Not the sort that would ever be praised in a London drawing room. Isolde sat at the small table in the old music room with the cracked porcelain lamp beside her, its painted swallows dull in daylight, and copied orders in a hand so careful that even fatigue could not make untidy. Thomas stood across from her, reading dates. Mrs. Fenlo supplied names. Alice brought tea and then forgot to leave because she was listening to the resurrection of a household. Cook, Mrs. Barden. Scullery maid, Nell Price. First laundry maid, Hester Vale. Second footman, John Pike. Stillroom maid, Ruth Ellaby. Each name entered the page like a candle being lit in a corridor. By noon, Isolde's head ached, and her fingers were cold despite the fire newly coaxed into the grate. She had learned that the kitchen had been reduced before any physician saw her at Mallowden. The stable staff had been cut before her bridal trunks left London. 2 rooms had been sheeted 10 days before she arrived. 3 local callers had been turned away in her name, though she had not known they existed. No single fact proved malice. Together they formed a shape. Someone had built a silence and placed her inside it. Thomas hesitated over the last memorandum. "There is one more matter, Your Grace. Read it. No further household correspondence to be posted without estate office review to prevent fatigue from unnecessary replies." Isolde looked up. "All correspondence." "So it says. Then my letter to His Grace will be reviewed by Sir Algernon." Thomas did not answer quickly enough. That was answer enough. Isolde took a fresh sheet, dipped her pen, and wrote to Leopold without accusation. She wrote that the household had been reduced before her arrival. She wrote that orders existed under his authority, but without his signature. She wrote that several servants were owed wages, and that she requested clarification. She did not write that he had left her in a house colder than indifference. She did not write that one lamp had done more to welcome her than her husband had. When the ink dried, she sealed the letter with plain wax because her own seal had not yet been unpacked. "James," she said when the footman entered, "this is to go by the afternoon post, directly." He bowed. "Yes, Your Grace." His hand was steady when he took it. His eyes were not. Isolde noticed, but she did not yet understand. She could not know that James had once served in Lady Drusilla Carne's London household before being recommended to Mallowden. She could not know that he would cross the yard, pass the post-bag, and deliver the sealed letter instead to a travelling groom waiting beyond the old coach-house. She only knew that the letter left her hand. As dusk settled, Mrs. Fenlow came quietly into the music room. Without asking permission, though with all the reverence of a vow, she took her own wooden peg from the small tray where the loose ones had been gathered and pressed it more firmly into the name-board brought temporarily to the music room table for copying. "I never left, Your Grace," she said. Isolde looked at the name Fenlow, dark against the pale wood. "No," she answered softly. "You did not." Outside, the front of Mallowden darkened again. Isolde rose, slower than she wished, and carried the cracked porcelain lamp to the window. Her hand trembled as she lit it, but the flame caught. Below stairs, for the first time since her arrival, the servants were eating something warm. In the passage, one restored peg held its place, and somewhere beyond the manor, on a road, leading away from the post and toward another house entirely, her first letter to her husband was already being carried into the wrong hands. On the 9th evening after his wedding, Leopold Aveline returned to Mallowden Manor, expecting disorder, and found instead a single lamp waiting for him. He saw it first from the turn in the avenue, a small amber flame, set high in the front of the house, steady against the deepening violet of an October dusk. The rest of the windows remained dark, but that one light changed the whole shape of the place. It did not make Mallowden grand, it made it awake. Leopold drew the carriage curtain back with 2 fingers and frowned, as if the lamp had accused him of something before he had even reached the door. Lady Drusilla Carne's note lay folded in his coat pocket, its elegant hand still sharp in his mind. "Your poor Duchess has taken to rearranging the household in a state of feverish agitation. I fear Mallowden is not quiet enough for her nerves, though heaven knows every effort was made. Come if you can. She will listen to you where she does not listen to reason. He had come prepared for confusion, a sick bride overtired by command, servants harried by sentimental interference, perhaps tears, perhaps reproaches. He had not come prepared for the smell of warm bread drifting faintly from the service court, or for the sight of a stable lantern properly trimmed, or for the footman opening the door before the carriage had fully stopped. James looked pale when he saw the Duke, but his livery was brushed and his bow exact. "Your Grace." Leopold stepped down. "Where is her Grace?" "In the old music room, Your Grace." "Is she unwell?" The question came too quickly. He heard it and disliked himself for it. James lowered his eyes. "Her Grace is tired, sir." "Tired. Not raving, not distressed. Tired." Leopold entered the hall. The sheets still covered much of the furniture, and the chill remained in the stone. But the place was not as he had left it. The marble table had been cleared of stale cards. A coal scuttle stood filled near the grate. 2 fresh candles burned beneath the stair. Somewhere below, a servant laughed once, then hushed the sound, but not before Leopold heard the astonished warmth of it. He paused beside the servant's passage. The household name-board caught his eye because it had altered. When he left, he had not noticed it. That neglect struck him before the board itself did. Now 6 pegs stood in the polished wood. Mrs. Fenlow, Reeve, Mary, Alice, James Cook, Mrs. Barden. The last name was not present in the house, if memory served. Yet the peg had been restored as if absence had not earned erasure. Leopold stared at it longer than a man should stare at a piece of wood. "Your Grace." Mrs. Fenlow appeared at the passage door. Her curtsy was formal, but her face had changed since his wedding night. The alarm had not vanished. It had learned caution. "You were not expected until next week." "So I understand." He turned from the board. "Her Grace has been writing to me, I am told." The housekeeper's eyes flickered. "Her Grace wrote 1 letter, Your Grace." "One? That I know of. I did not receive it." Silence moved through the passage like cold air under a door. Mrs. Fenlow's hands folded at her waist. "Then I cannot say where it went, Your Grace." He believed her. The realization was unpleasant, because belief came too late to feel generous. "Take me to the music room." The old music room faced west, where the last light of day lay in grey bands across the covered pianoforte and the polished floor. Leopold stopped in the doorway. Isolde stood near the center table, with a shawl around her shoulders, one hand resting on the edge of a ledger, while Thomas Reeve read figures aloud. She looked thinner than she had in the carriage. He, 9 days earlier. Her pallor had deepened, and the faint shadows beneath her eyes gave her face a transparency he found more disturbing than any dramatic collapse would have been. Yet she was upright, lucid, listening. The cracked porcelain lamp stood beside her, its 2 painted swallows turned toward the window. Its flame trembled as if it had learned endurance from the woman who tended it. Thomas looked up first and went still. Isolde followed his gaze. For a moment, nothing in her expression changed. That was the worst of it. She had not been waiting for him, or if she had trained herself not to show it. "Your Grace," she said, and gave a small curtsy. Not low enough to be warm, not shallow enough to be insulting. Perfectly correct. "Duchess." Leopold entered. "I was informed you had been overexerting yourself. That depends on who profits from my idleness." Thomas inhaled, then pretended he had not. Leopold's gaze moved to the papers on the table. Columns of names, wages, dates, several memoranda copied in a neat hand, his wife's hand, presumably. "Mr. Reeve, leave us." Isolde's fingers tightened on the ledger. Leopold saw it. So did Thomas. The young man stepped back, uncertain. Isolde spoke before he could go. "Mr. Reeve is reading household wages, Your Grace. Nothing improper is being discussed." Leopold looked at her. "I did not suggest impropriety. No, you suggested removal." The words were quiet. They struck with more force because she did not raise her voice. Leopold felt, absurdly, as if the covered portraits on the walls had turned their faces toward him. "Very well," he said. "Mr. Reeve may remain until his figures are complete." Something like surprise passed through the room. Isolde inclined her head. "Thank you. Do not thank me for correcting my own command." He had not meant to say it. The sentence escaped because the lamp, the board, the warm kitchen smell, and his wife's disciplined exhaustion had unsettled the habits by which he usually governed himself. Isolde looked at him, then really looked, and for the first time since the chapel he saw not only illness in her face, but intelligence measuring the distance between what he had done and what he might yet do. Thomas finished reading in a careful voice. 3 weeks of wages owed to the maids, 5 to 2 outdoor men, a quarter's recommendation promised to Mrs. Barden, unpaid, coal accounted as delivered, though the cellars showed half the entry, oil charged in quantities no dark house had used. Leopold listened without interruption. When Thomas was dismissed at last, he left the ledger open. Isolde remained standing until the door closed. Then her strength betrayed her by a fraction. She placed one hand lightly on the back of a chair. Not enough to lean, enough to survive. Leopold took one step, then stopped. He had no right yet to make concern another form of command. "Sit if you wish," he said. Her mouth softened, though not into a smile. "I know when I must sit, Your Grace." "Do you?" "I have had more practice with weakness than you have had with observing it." The rebuke was gentle enough for a drawing room, and honest enough for a wound. Leopold accepted it in silence. Isolde lowered herself into the chair, not defeated, but deliberate, and turned the nearest memorandum toward him. "This order dismissed the kitchen staff 3 days before I arrived. This one closed the east sitting room 10 days before I entered the house. This one says no callers are to be admitted because Lady Aveline cannot bear replies." Leopold took the paper. "Lady Aveline? Yes, that is not your title." "No." The small word opened a colder chamber inside him. He read the order again. The phrasing wore authority like a borrowed coat. It sounded close enough to his estate office to deceive anyone accustomed to obedience, yet not close enough to be his. He never used necessary disturbance. He never referred to a duchess by an invented courtesy. He set the paper down. "Where did you find these?" "Mrs. Fenlow and Mr. Reeve had copies. Sir Algernon retained the originals." "Pithwick sent these, under your authority." His jaw hardened. "Not by my hand. I did not say by your hand. But you thought it. I thought many things. When I entered a house with no fire in the front rooms and 5 servants afraid to speak. The silence, after that, had weight." Leopold looked toward the window. The lamp burned there, small and obstinate. Its light touched the crack in the porcelain swallow's wing and made the floor shine darker. He remembered the lamp then. His mother had kept it in this room when he was a boy. He had forgotten it entirely. Isolde had not known his mother, yet she had found the one object in Mallowden that still understood welcome. "Why that lamp?" he asked. "Because it was there." "That is not an answer. It is the first answer. The second is that your mother seems to have understood something this house forgot." His throat tightened unexpectedly. What was that? That someone might be coming home tired. Leopold could not answer at once. Outside, the dusk pressed close to the glass. Inside, the lamplight held. He saw then what Drusilla had not described, and what he himself had been too willing not to imagine. His wife's hands trembled faintly when she adjusted the ledger pages. She hid the tremor by flattening the paper. Her breath was measured with the care of someone refusing a cough an audience. She was not performing fragility. She was concealing it so that others would not be troubled. The knowledge landed with a force sharper than accusation. "You are ill," he said softly. "Yes." Her eyes met his. "I have never denied it. But you are not helpless." "No." "And you did not ask for the house to be emptied." "No." The third no was the quietest. It should have been the easiest to believe. He felt ashamed that it had taken a lamp and a ledger to bring him to it. A knock came at the door before he could speak. Sir Algernon Pithwick entered without waiting for permission. A polished man of 46, with silver at his temples and a smile that treated every room as if it belonged to his competence. He stopped when he saw Leopold, only for a heartbeat. Then he bowed. "Your Grace, we had not expected you. That has become evident." Sir Algernon's gaze moved to the open ledger, then to Isolde seated beside it. "I fear her Grace has been troubling herself with matters much too burdensome for delicate health." Isolde's face did not change, but Leopold saw her fingers curl once against the arm of the chair. He turned fully toward the estate agent. "You will not speak of her Grace as if she were absent while she is in the room." Sir Algernon blinked. "Of course, Your Grace. I meant only that women of sensitive constitution are often encouraged by excessive concern to exceed their strength." "Then be brief. Did you issue household dismissal orders in my name?" "Under estate necessity, Your Grace, with consideration for her Grace's comfort." "Did I sign them?" Your Grace had expressed a desire for quiet. "That was not my question." The room went very still. Sir Algernon's smile thinned. "No, Your Grace. Not personally." Leopold took the memorandum from the table and held it out. "By tomorrow morning, you will produce every dismissal order, wage record, transfer list, oil account, coal account, and room closure inventory connected to Mallowden from Michaelmas to this day. Originals. Not copies." Sir Algernon's eyes flickered toward Isolde. "Your Grace, such matters may distress the Duchess. Her Grace has endured distress enough from decisions made behind her back." Leopold's voice lowered. "You will bring the records." Sir Algernon bowed because rank gave him no alternative. "As Your Grace commands." When he left, the room seemed to exhale. Isolde looked at the closed door, then at Leopold. "That is the first time anyone has asked for the originals. It should not have been." No. A fragile candor rested between them. Not warmth yet, but something less cold than before. Leopold looked again at the lamp. "You said the house had stopped speaking." "Yes. And what is it saying now?" Isolde was silent for a moment. Her face was tired, her body too slight beneath the shawl, but her voice held. "It is saying someone used your name to make it empty." Leopold turned from the window to his wife. "Then we shall learn who." Her gaze did not soften. "Not yet." But she did not look away. "We shall learn whether you wish to hear it." The sentence remained after her voice ended. Down the passage, the restored pegs waited on the board. In the window, the cracked lamp burned on, and for the first time since Leopold had brought his bride to Mallowden, the house did not feel quiet. It felt awake and listening. By the following morning, the old music room had become the only place in Mallowden where truth was permitted to sit in the open. The covered pianoforte remained under its holland sheet, and most of the chairs still wore their ghostly drapery. But the center table had been cleared, polished, and claimed. On it lay the copied Dismissal orders Isolde had made in her own hand. Thomas Reeves' wage ledger, 2 coal tallies, and the first of the room closure inventories Sir Algernon had been forced to produce. Leopold stood at one side of the table, his dark morning coat severe against the pale room. Isolde sat opposite him with Mrs. Fenlo stationed near the door, not close enough to listen as a gossip might, but near enough to satisfy propriety and to answer if summoned. That mattered. Leopold had noticed that Isolde noticed such things. She was not merely modest because society demanded it. She was precise because imprecision had been used against her. The east sitting room was covered on the 4th of October, she said, touching the inventory page with one finger. I arrived on the 11th. Leopold leaned closer, though not so close that his sleeve brushed hers. The order claims the room was closed to prevent drafts from troubling you. A thoughtful concern for a woman who had not yet crossed the threshold. Her voice was quiet. No bitterness softened it. Bitterness would have been easier for him to answer. Who signed the inventory? Mr. Rail, the old butler, if the signature is genuine. Mrs. Fenlo spoke from the doorway. He was dismissed 2 days later, Your Grace. Leopold looked up. Where is he now? With his married sister near Winchester, I believe. He would not leave willingly. He wept in the passage, though he begged us not to say so. The words drew a stillness over the room. A butler's tears were not the sort of thing a house admitted unless some deep order had been violated. Leopold's jaw tightened. Send for him. With whose authority? Isolde asked. He turned to her. Mine. And if he fears the same authority that dismissed him? Leopold did not answer at once. He had commanded men in Parliament, tenants in dispute, magistrates who owed his house courtesy, and servants who never questioned the sound of his voice. Yet his wife's question found the weak place beneath rank. Then write in your name, he said. Ask him to come as witness, not servant. She lowered her gaze to the page, but not before he saw the flicker there. Surprise, caution, perhaps the smallest acknowledgement that he had heard what she had not quite asked. I will write after luncheon. A gust struck the poorly sealed window, rattling the frame hard enough to make the flame in the cracked porcelain lamp leap sideways. Isolde reached at once for the glass chimney. Leopold moved at the same instant. Their fingers met around the warm curve of the lamp glass. Neither had intended the touch. That was why it silenced them both. His hand was larger, steady, gloved no longer. Hers was cool despite the fire, the bones fine beneath skin that had spent too many days fighting cold. For the length of one breath, they held the lamp together, preserving the little flame between them. Isolde looked down at their joined hands as if the sight belonged to some other marriage, one in which a husband and wife might have learned the shape of each other before learning the shape of betrayal. Leopold released first, not abruptly. Carefully, the glass settled back into place, the flame steadied, and the room returned too loudly. Forgive me, he said. There is nothing to forgive. We both wished to prevent the lamp from falling. That is not all I meant. Her eyes lifted. The silence changed again, not soft yet, but less empty. Mrs. Fenlo looked fixedly at the door, pretending not to have witnessed anything. Isolde folded her hands in her lap, but he saw that her right forefinger still remembered where his had touched it. He remembered too. The knowledge was unwelcome only because it was gentle. Before either could speak, wheels sounded on the gravel outside, not the heavy roll of estate carts. A lighter carriage, better sprung, travelling with the confidence of people who expected doors to open. Mrs. Fenlo turned from the doorway. Your Grace, I was not informed of callers. Leopold's expression cooled. Nor was I. A footman's hurried step crossed the hall, followed by a voice polished to sweetness. Pray do not trouble the Duchess if she is resting. We shall only inquire. Isolde's face became perfectly calm. Leopold was beginning to recognize that calm. It was not ease, it was armor. Lady Drusilla Khan entered as if Mallowden had been arranged for her inspection. She wore violet silk, trimmed in black braid, elegant enough for a morning call, and somber enough to excuse intrusion as concern. Behind her came Dowager Lady Khan, narrow, upright, and pale with the sort of aristocratic fragility that had never prevented a woman from doing damage. Drusilla's eyes passed over the table. They paused on the copied orders. They moved to the lamp, then to Leopold's hand, as if she had arrived 1 second too late to see where it had been. "Cousin," she said, smiling, "we were so relieved to hear you had returned. Dear Isolde, you look quite overcome." "Good morning, Lady Drusilla," Isolde said. "I am seated, not overcome." Dowager Lady Khan gave a little sigh. How brave. Though one worries that bravery may become strain when a lady has not the constitution for management. Leopold stepped away from the table, drawing their attention fully to himself before they could arrange the room around Isolde's weakness. "This is a household review, not a sick-room visit." Drusilla's smile did not falter. Of course, still, surely, her grace should not be troubled with servants' names and coal tallies. It is not unkind to spare a delicate woman the noise of a full household. "It is unkind to remove a household and call the absence peace," Isolde said. Drusilla blinked once, only once. "My dear, no one would wish you to feel absent." "Then it is fortunate I am present." Mrs. Fenlo lowered her eyes so quickly that the movement nearly betrayed a smile. Leopold did not smile. He watched Drusilla's hand tighten around her reticule. "Several rooms were closed before the Duchess arrived," he said. "Several servants were dismissed under the claim of her comfort. I would be interested to know who advised such a plan." Dowager Lady Khan adjusted one black glove. "My nephew, you must not let a young bride's distress turn every prudent arrangement into conspiracy." Lady Drusilla merely observed what many of us had observed. Miss Marchwin, as she was then, had a history of frailty. "I have a history of illness," Isolde said. "Frailty is a judgment others have found convenient." Drusilla's gaze sharpened. "You must not think us enemies because we wish the house quiet for you. I do not think you my enemy because you wished the house quiet." Isolde rested her hand lightly beside the ledger. "I wonder why you wished it answerable to everyone but me." That landed. Even Leopold felt the force of it. The dowager's lips thinned. Drusilla looked at the lamp again, perhaps because it was easier than looking at the woman beside it. What a sentimental object to revive. I remember the late Duchess had a habit of setting it in the window when Leopold came home from school. It was touching, if a little theatrical. "My mother was never theatrical," Leopold said. The coldness in his voice was absolute. "No," Drusilla replied quickly. "Of course not. I only meant that memory can make a house feel warmer than it is." "The Duchess has made it warmer by feeding the servants," he said. "That seems less sentimental." Drusilla's cheeks colored. She recovered with speed. "Then you approve of these exertions?" Leopold looked at Isolde before he answered. He had failed to consult her once already that morning when asking Thomas to leave. He did not repeat it. "I approve of knowing who acted in my name. And I approve of being told what I supposedly required," Isolde added. Dowager Lady Khan rose from the chair she had taken without invitation. "You are newly married, both of you. A young duchess often mistakes guidance for insult. Isolde stood. It cost her. Leopold saw the small delay between intention and movement, the invisible tax her body demanded. He did not reach for her. Not here. Not without asking. She placed one palm on the table and held herself upright. No, Lady Khan. I mistake being excluded for being excluded. Guidance would have spoken to me. Drusilla's smile had gone thin as paper. Then I hope Mallowden proves equal to your strength. So do I, Isolde said. And if it does not, I shall sit before I fall. That is not weakness. It is sense. For the first time, Leopold saw his wife not as the pale bride he had left, nor even as the careful woman who had found discrepancies in ledgers. He saw a duchess. Not because she stood without trembling. She did tremble. Not because society had crowned her with his title. Society had done nothing but narrow its eyes at her. She was a duchess. Because she refused to let concern become a chain. Drusilla and her mother left soon after, carrying their courtesy like a covered blade. The carriage had barely rolled away before Isolde sat again, slowly, with no apology. Leopold turned to Mrs. Fenlo. No caller is to be admitted to her grace without her grace's permission. Not Lady Drusilla, not Lady Khan, not any person claiming concern on my behalf. The housekeeper curtsied. Yes, your grace. Isolde looked toward him. That is a useful order, but not sufficient? No. What would be sufficient? She touched the inventory page. The truth of who closed these rooms before I entered them. Leopold drew the page closer. Then we begin with the rooms. And the oil, she said. Thomas mentioned the lamp ledger. Mrs. Fenlo crossed to the side table and brought the smaller book, bound in cracked brown leather. Leopold opened it. The entries were neat. Too neat. Oil charged for lamps in rooms that had been sheeted. Oil signed for by servants already dismissed. Oil enough to light a house twice the size of Mallowden, yet the manor had stood almost dark when Isolde arrived. Leopold read 3 lines, then 4. His face changed. This is theft. Isolde looked toward the window, where the cracked lamp still burned in the pale morning. No, she said softly, it is more than theft. Leopold understood before she finished. The missing servants, the closed rooms, the false quiet, the dark windows. Someone wanted the house to look dead, and wanted you to believe I required it so. Outside, the last sound of Drusilla's carriage faded into the lane. Inside, the lamp flame steadied behind its cracked glass, and, on the table between husband and wife, the first true shape of the scheme began to show itself. By the 14th day of her marriage, Isolde had learned that a household could be made to whisper lies even when no one inside it spoke them aloud. A chair placed too near the fire could say invalid. A tray brought too early could say useless. A door closed before callers arrived could say not fit to receive. That morning, as the first parish relief meeting at Mallowden began, every object in the old music room seemed to have been arranged by unseen hands to ask whether the Duchess of Brackenholt had the strength to belong there. Isolde answered by arranging the room herself. She did not choose the great drawing room where her voice would have been swallowed by height and chandelier glass. She chose the music room because the western light fell clearly across the table, because the cracked porcelain lamp stood near the window like a witness, and because the door opened wide enough for servants, tenants, and county ladies to pass without crowding one another. The covered pianoforte remained against the wall, but the rest of the room had changed. 3 chairs were set for parish matrons. 2 benches had been brought for tenant wives. Thomas Reeve stood near the smaller writing table with a clean ledger. Mrs. Fenlo received baskets of linen with the solemnity of a churchwarden. A tray of bread and broth tickets lay beside Isolde's papers, each marked for a family that had applied through the vicar, rather than through Sir Algernon Pithwick's office. It was not grand charity. It was orderly charity. It did not ask the poor to be grateful for disorder. Leopold stood near the mantel, watching the room fill with the same look he gave disputed accounts. Isolde could feel his attention even when she did not look at him. It had changed since their first night. It no longer passed over her like a decision already made. It paused. It measured. Sometimes, when she turned a page too slowly, it warmed with concern and then restrained itself before concern became command. She found that restraint harder to dismiss than kindness. Lady Drusilla Khan arrived with Dowager Lady Khan just as the vicar's wife was taking her seat. Drusilla wore pale grey, a colour chosen to look gentle beside Isolde's deep blue morning gown. Her eyes moved first to the lamp, then to the table, then to the chair Isolde had chosen for herself. It was not the largest chair in the room, nor the softest. It was firm-backed, positioned where she could see the door, the ledger, and every face that intended to pity her. "Dear Isolde," Drusilla said, carrying concern across the room as if it were a bowl filled to the brim. "You are undertaking a great deal." "Good morning, Lady Drusilla." Isolde dipped her head. "We are undertaking only what should already have been done." A few glances shifted. Leopold's gaze did not. He remained still, but something in the line of his mouth suggested that he had heard the word "we" and understood its purpose. It included Mrs. Fenlo. It included Thomas. It did not yet include him without proof. Dowager Lady Khan sighed as she settled into the chair nearest the fire, though no one had invited her to preside. One does admire spirit in a young duchess. Provided spirit does not outrun health, then let us hope wisdom keeps pace with both, Isolde replied. Mrs. Fenlo lowered her eyes, but Thomas Reeves' pen paused for one dangerous second over the ledger. The vicar, Mr. Anstruther, cleared his throat and began with the parish list. There were widows needing coal before Martinmas. 3 children required boots. The roof of a labourer's cottage had failed in the last rain. Sir Algernon's office had marked 2 families ineligible due to irregular tenancy, though Thomas had found no record of rent arrears. Isolde asked each question seated, pen in hand, voice calm. She did not pretend that sitting was unnecessary. She did not turn it into apology. When a tenant widow named Mrs. Vale was brought forward, twisting her bonnet strings in both hands, Isolde looked at her directly. "Mrs. Vale, how many children are under your roof?" "3, Your Grace. 4 when my sister's boy comes from the next parish, but he's not mine to claim." "A hungry child under your roof is yours to feed for that day," Isolde said. "Thomas, mark 4 portions of broth and bread through Saturday, and coal for 1 week pending roof inspection." Mrs. Vale stared as if she had expected a lecture and received arithmetic. "Thank you, Your Grace." Drusilla's voice floated from near the hearth. "How touching." "Her Grace has made quite a little court of mercy." The room cooled. Isolde looked up, but before she could speak, Leopold moved. Not toward Drusilla, toward the chair near the window. It had been standing a little too far from the table, and Isolde had ignored the distance because pride could be as foolish as cowardice when given too much authority. Leopold placed one hand on its back and drew it closer by several inches. The motion was quiet, no flourish, no public declaration that his wife was fragile. He did not touch her shoulder. He did not announce that she must sit more comfortably. He simply moved the chair nearer the light, then stepped back. The choice remained hers. That was why it unsettled her. Isolde looked at the chair, then at him. His expression did not beg thanks. It did not demand obedience. In his eyes, she saw something more difficult. The effort of a powerful man learning not to use power for every form of care. She sat more fully, adjusting her papers without haste. "Thank you," she said, low enough that only he and perhaps Mrs. Fenlo could hear. Leopold answered just as quietly, "I should have noticed sooner." Her fingers stilled on the paper. Not an apology exactly. Not enough, but not nothing. Drusilla watched the exchange, and for the first time that morning, her kindness sharpened at the edges. How fortunate His Grace is here to prevent overexertion. Isolde turned a page. His Grace is here to hear parish accounts. Leopold looked to the vicar. Proceed. 2 words, enough to place his rank beneath the meeting's purpose rather than above it. The relief continued. Linen was assigned, roof inspection ordered. Mrs. Fenlo produced a list of kitchen stores. That would have embarrassed a lesser house and ashamed a better steward. When Thomas opened the lamp oil ledger, the pattern that had begun as suspicion took firmer shape. Oil delivered on the 6th, he read, signed by John Pike, 2nd footman. John Pike was dismissed on the 2nd, Mrs. Fenlo said. He had gone to his mother's cottage by then. Thomas turned another page. Oil delivered on the 9th, signed by Ruth Ellaby, stillroom maid. Dismissed on the 1st, Isolde said. She had copied the name herself. Leopold took the ledger when Thomas offered it. His eyes moved down the entries, and Isolde saw the instant calculation settle over his face. Oil charged to absent servants, rooms closed before arrival, windows dark, despite full deliveries. A silent house made profitable. "Mr. Reeve," Leopold said, "send to John Pike and Ruth Ellaby. Ask whether either signed for deliveries after dismissal. If they fear returning to Mallowden, they may send written statements through Mr. Anstruther." The vicar nodded gravely. "I will receive them, Your Grace." Drusilla gave a soft laugh. "Surely we are not turning a parish meeting into an inquiry over lamp oil." "We are turning nothing," Isolde said. "We are finding what has already been turned." Mrs. Vale, who had not yet moved from the table, looked from Isolde to Leopold, and then back again, "Begging your pardon, Your Grace. But the house did look black these past weeks. From the lower road, I mean. We thought no one was wanted here." Isolde felt the words in the center of her chest. No one was wanted here. Leopold heard them too. She could tell by the stillness that came over him. "You are wanted now, Mrs. Vale," Isolde said. "Tell the village that Mallowden will receive petitions every Thursday morning until the arrears of neglect are known." Drusilla rose in a shimmer of grey silk. A bold promise. "The county will be fascinated." "Then let it be fascinated by accuracy," Isolde said. The meeting ended not with triumph, but with names entered and tasks assigned. That was better. Triumph made noise. Work made change. When the last tenant had gone, and the vicar's wife had promised to carry the first notices to the parish, Isolde remained seated beside the window lamp, while the room emptied. Fatigue pressed behind her eyes. She let it show only when the door closed. Leopold was still there. "You should rest," he said. Then, after the briefest pause, "That is not an order." Isolde almost smiled. Almost. Good. He looked at the ledger in his hand. "Someone profited from making my house appear unwelcoming." "Yes. And someone profited from making me believe you required it." Her breath caught, but she did not look away. "Yes." In the corridor beyond, Drusilla's departing voice reached them, sweet enough to be overheard. "It is touching, really, His Grace indulging the little household theatre. I only hope the county will not think he married a woman too weak to stand and too proud to rest." The words hung in the air after the front door closed. Leopold's hand tightened around the ledger. Isolde turned toward the lamp, its cracked swallows bright in the pale afternoon. "There," she said softly. "Now we know what she intends them to think." Before dawn on the 16th day of her marriage, Isolde woke to the certainty that the window lamp had gone out. No sound had warned her. No servant had entered. Yet she opened her eyes in the dark bedchamber with the same sudden knowledge one has when a candle gutters in a sick room and leaves the walls too close. For a moment she lay still, listening to Mallowden breathe around her. The old house held its silences differently now. There was still cold in the corridors and too much hollowness behind closed doors, but beneath it ran small, living sounds. A maid setting kindling in the kitchen range, a groom crossing the yard, Mrs. Fenlow's measured step somewhere below. That was why the absence struck her. The upper window no longer answered the dark. Isolde rose without ringing. Her body protested at once. The parish meeting 2 days before had cost her more than she had admitted, and the hours spent afterward copying oil entries had left a dull ache behind her eyes. She dressed in a plain wool wrapper and took her shawl from the chair. The air bit through both. She did not allow herself to cough until she reached the passage and could cover the sound with one hand against the wall. The old music room lay at the end of the corridor, like a room holding its breath. The lamp stood in the window. Its chimney smoked, its wick sunk low in its collar. It had not failed from lack of oil. Someone had trimmed it badly before retiring, likely Mary, who had been so exhausted at prayers that her eyelids drooped. Isolde could have left it. Dawn would arrive within the hour. No traveller would need the little flame. No servant would accuse her if the window stayed dark until breakfast. But she remembered the first night, remembered the black face of the manor, and the strange shame of entering a house that had made no sign of expectation. She crossed the room, opened the small tin, and coaxed the wick upward. Her fingers were clumsy with cold. The match flared too quickly. A bead of hot oil spat from the collar and kissed the pad of her thumb. Pain flashed bright and mean. Isolde drew in a breath, but did not cry out. She set the match properly, watched the flame catch, and only then pressed her injured thumb against the edge of her shawl. "That was foolish," a voice said behind her. She turned too quickly and gripped the table until the room steadied. Leopold stood in the doorway, fully dressed though unshaven, his dark coat open at the throat, as if he too had risen in haste rather than ceremony. The grey before dawn hollowed his face, making him look less like a duke and more like a man who had not slept well because truth had begun to ask questions he could not dismiss. "You startled me," she said. "I'm sorry." The contraction sounded strange from him, not because it was unnatural, but because apology sat uneasily in a mouth trained for command. His gaze moved to her hand. "You are hurt. A small burn. May I see?" The question stilled her more than the pain. He had not said, "Give me your hand." He had not stepped forward, and taken it because marriage gave him permission in the eyes of the law. He waited by the door, where dawn had not yet touched him, while the lamp between them burned with the fragile persistence of a thing both had now protected. Isolde looked down at her thumb. A small red mark was rising where the oil had struck. Nothing dramatic, nothing worth fuss. Yet the very smallness of it made the question more intimate. A grave injury could be tended by duty. A tiny burn required attention. "Yes," she said. "You may." Leopold crossed the room. He moved carefully, stopping beside the table rather than crowding her at the window. He took a clean square of linen from the stack. Mrs. Fenlo had left near the ledgers, dipped it into the water jug, and held out his other hand palm upward. Isolde placed her hand in his for the first time by choice. Not for assistance from a carriage, not to satisfy a room, for care. His fingers closed lightly around hers, steady but not possessive. The wet linen touched her thumb, cool enough to ease the sting. Isolde looked at their hands because looking at his face would have revealed too much of what the gesture did to her. "You light it yourself every morning?" he asked. "Not every morning. Every night. When I can." "Why?" She almost gave the practical answer. "Because the servants are tired. Because there is too little oil and too much confusion about who is responsible. Because one light in the upper window costs less than pride and more than silence." But his hand was warm beneath hers, and the question had not been asked as an accusation. "Because the house looked so forsaken the evening I arrived," she said. "I could not bear for any person coming up the road to think no one was expected." His hand went very still. He did not release her. He did not tighten his grip either. That restraint spoke more clearly than any sudden protest. "You were the one who was not expected," he said. "I was expected as a title, not as a person." The words left her quietly. Once spoken, they could not be called back. Leopold lowered his eyes to the linen. "I made it easy for them to do that." Yes, the plain answer landed between them. She did not soften it. He did not ask her to. Outside, a cart rattled faintly somewhere beyond the stable yard, then faded. The first grey line of morning entered the window and touched the two painted swallows on the lamp base. One wing whole, one crossed by its dark crack. Leopold changed the linen's angle with a care that made her throat tighten. "Does it pain you?" "Less now." "You should not have had to keep a light in my window. It is not only your window." He looked up. For the first time that morning, something like surprise unsettled him. "No, no, no." Mrs. Fenlo looks for it when she crosses the yard after checking the kitchen fires. Thomas told me yesterday that Mary watches it before going to bed, as if it means the upper rooms are not entirely abandoned. Even James, when he forgets to look guilty, glances toward it. Leopold's expression sharpened at the name. James looks guilty. Isolde cursed herself for saying too much, then refused to retreat into vagueness. "When I gave him my letter to you, he looked as if I had handed him something heavier than paper." "I did not understand it then." Leopold slowly released her hand, but not as a withdrawal of care. He folded the damp linen once and set it on the table. "You never received a reply because I never received the letter." "I know. You suspect James. I suspect that he fears someone. That is not the same as guilt." Leopold studied her as if that distinction mattered more than the fact itself. "You defend him?" "I name what I know, nothing more." A knock sounded, hurried and soft. Thomas Reeve stood outside the open door, hair untidy, ledger coat buttoned wrong in his haste. He stopped when he saw them, then flushed, as if dawn itself had caught him intruding. "Forgive me, Your Grace." "Your Grace." "Speak, Reeve," Leopold said. Thomas looked at Isolde first. That alone told her the balance of the house had changed. "I found something behind the estate office cupboard. I went before Sir Algernon's clerk arrived, as Mrs. Fenlo said the cupboard had been moved in September and never properly set back." He held out a cloth bundle. "I think you should see it before anyone else does." Leopold took the bundle and opened it on the music room table. Wooden pegs rolled softly onto the polished surface. Not one, dozens. Some were clean, some scratched. Some bore names half worn by fingers that had turned them for years. Barden, Rail Hester Vale, Ruth John Pike, Nell Price. A whole household reduced to loose wood hidden behind a cupboard. Isolde reached for the table, but stopped before touching the pegs. They seemed almost sacred in their injury. They were not lost, she said. Thomas shook his head. No, your grace. Hidden. Leopold's face had gone cold in the way winter water was cold. Not noisy, but dangerous to anything foolish enough to underestimate it. Who had access to that cupboard? Sir Algernon, his clerk. Myself, when permitted. Thomas swallowed. Sir Algernon told me yesterday that if I continued troubling old accounts, my mother's cottage lease might be found irregular. Isolde felt Leopold's anger enter the room before he spoke. It was controlled, but it changed the air. Your mother's cottage is on Aveline land? Yes, your grace. Then Sir Algernon does not touch it. From this hour, no lease, wage, dismissal, transfer, or household order concerning any person at Mallowden is valid without review by me and her grace. Thomas stared. Her grace, sir? Leopold turned slightly toward Isolde. If her grace permits such review to be made in her presence. Isolde heard what he had done, not bestowed authority, asked whether she would share the burden of it. Her burned thumb throbbed beneath the cooling linen, small proof that even light had a cost. I permit it, she said. And Mr. Reeve is not to be punished for bringing names back into a house that should never have lost them. Thomas bowed his head. For one moment, he looked younger than 25. Thank you, your grace. Isolde picked up the peg-marked rail and set it beside Mrs. Barden's name. Send to the old butler today. Write that he is invited as a witness, not summoned as a servant. Leopold looked at her. Those were your words to me. They were useful. Then use them. The smallest warmth passed between them, too brief to trust and too real to deny. No hand touched now. No vow had been spoken. Yet the room held the memory of his fingers supporting hers and her permission freely given. Outside, morning finally lifted over Mallowden. The cracked window lamp still burned, pale against the arriving day, while, on the table beneath it, the hidden names of the house waited to be restored. The invitation to supper at Barrowdene House arrived on the 18th morning of Isolde's marriage, written in a hand so gracefully impersonal that insult hid itself inside courtesy. Sir William and Lady Ashcombe requested the honour of the Duke and Duchess of Brackenholt's company for a small county gathering. Nothing formal, nothing fatiguing, merely neighbours wishing to welcome her grace into Hampshire. The note lay on the music-room table beside the recovered name pegs, and Isolde read it twice before passing it to Leopold. Lady Ashcombe has never called on me, she said. Leopold looked at the crest, pressed into the wax. She is close to Lady Khan. Then the welcome has teeth. Across the room, Thomas Reeve pretended not to hear. Mrs. Fenlow did not pretend at all. Her mouth tightened as she folded linen over the pegs that still had not been returned to the board. Because too many names now had to be matched with testimony before ceremony could replace truth. Leopold set the invitation down. You are under no obligation to attend. Isolde looked toward the window. The cracked lamp stood unlit in daylight. The two swallows dim against porcelain, one wing scarred by its fine dark line. No, that is precisely why I must consider it. You do not have to prove strength to people waiting to call it pride. I know, she turned back to him, but if I do not go, they will say I cannot. If I go and sit, they will say I should not. If I stand, they will count my breaths. I prefer to be present while they invent me. Leopold's expression shifted, but he did not argue. He had begun to learn that argument offered too quickly could become another door closed in her face. "Then we go together," he said. "As long as together does not mean you answer for me." His gaze held hers. It will not. She wanted to believe him. That was the danger. Hope did not enter loudly. It found the narrowest crack in discipline and passed through like cold air. By evening, Barrowden House shone with the sort of warmth that Mallowden had been denied. Candles lined the supper room, silver-reflected faces already arranged for sympathy. There were county ladies in pearls, 2 neighbouring squires, the vicar and his wife, Sir William Ashcombe, with his florid good humour, and Lady Ashcombe seated at the foot of the table, with Lady Drusilla Carn beside her like a pale grey flame. Dowager Lady Carn sat near the fire, her lace cap trembling whenever she inclined her head to receive whispers. Isolde entered on Leopold's arm, though his hand rested only where etiquette required and no more. She felt the room register her pallor, her measured steps, the dark blue silk that made no plea for prettiness, and the small pause she allowed herself before crossing the threshold. Then she saw the chairs. 3 empty chairs had been placed beside her assigned seat. One with a cushion, one angled away from the table as though prepared for retreat, one set slightly behind, near a screen, as if a woman might be removed from conversation while still remaining available for observation. Lady Drusilla rose at once. "Dear Isolde, we hoped to make every provision. If noise fatigues you, you need only withdraw a little. Everyone understands." A silence followed, soft as velvet and just as smothering. Isolde looked at the chairs. Then she looked at Drusilla. How generous! I had not known my comfort required furniture in triplicate. A man near the sideboard coughed into his napkin. Lady Ashcombe smiled too quickly. "We only wished you easy. Ease is welcome," he said. "Display is less so." Leopold's arm changed beneath her fingers, not movement, tension. He had seen the insult now, and she sensed the force in him that wished to sweep the chairs away, dismiss the room, make rank thunder where courtesy had been made poisonous. He did none of it. He waited. Isolde chose the chair at the table, not the cushioned one, not the retreating one. The chair from which she could be seen and heard. Supper began with soup, pheasant, and polite questions about the weather, the roads, and whether Mallowden's air suited her grace. Isolde answered each with exact calm. The room wanted fragility. She gave it. Grammar. Leopold spoke little, but when Lady Ashcombe asked whether the Duchess found the house mercifully quiet, he said, "Mallowden is becoming less quiet where quiet was neglect." Conversation faltered. Drusilla lowered her spoon. Surely neglect is a grave word for household economy. "So is mercy," Isolde said, "when used without asking the person meant to receive it. That should have ended the matter for a decent room. This one had not gathered to be decent." When the final course was removed and the servants withdrew, Sir Algernon Pithwick entered through the side door with a leather dispatch case in his hand. He bowed to Sir William, then to Leopold, then to the room as though reluctant duty had dragged him into society. Isolde felt the temperature change before anyone spoke. Thomas was not there. Mrs. Fenlow was not there. The recovered pegs were at Mallowden, wrapped in linen. Here Drusilla had chosen witnesses and timing. "Forgive the intrusion," Sir Algernon said. Lady Ashcombe urged that confusion regarding Mallowden might best be settled among friends before gossip does harm. "How considerate," Leopold said. His voice had gone flat. Sir Algernon opened the case. "Several persons in the county have expressed concern that Her Grace's recent exertions have been caused by a misunderstanding of necessary arrangements made for her. comfort. Isolde placed her hands in her lap beneath the table. Her burned thumb, almost healed, gave one small pulse of remembered pain. Leopold stood. This is not the place. Drusilla's eyes widened with practiced innocence. But cousin, if dear Isolde has been troubled by false impressions, wouldn't it be kinder to reassure her at once? Isolde looked at Leopold. Let him read. His gaze turned to her sharply. You need not endure this, I know. Let him read. That was consent, but not forgiveness. Sir Algernon drew out copied orders. He read in a voice trained by years of making numbers sound moral. Reduction of kitchen staff, requested due to her Grace's sensitivity to household movement. East sitting room closed due to Lady Avelin's inability to bear drafts and callers. Outer correspondence to be reviewed to prevent fatigue. Lamp usage reduced to preserve calm in upper rooms. Several guests murmured. Lady Ashcombe pressed a handkerchief to her mouth, though whether in pity or satisfaction, Isolde could not tell. These are copies, Leopold said. Where are the originals? In the estate office, Your Grace. I did not bring originals to supper. Yet you brought accusations. Sir Algernon bowed his head. Only explanations. Drusilla leaned forward. No one accuses her Grace. We all understand that illness alters judgment. A young lady accustomed to dependence may forget what she asked when frightened. Isolde felt the room look at her, not as Duchess, not as wife, as a delicate inconvenience who might have unmade a house and then forgotten the sound of her own orders. Leopold turned toward her, and for one moment she saw belief in his face. Not perfect, not yet shaped into action, but there. Then Sir Algernon placed one final copied order on the table. It bore phrasing close to Leopold's own estate instructions, the formal cadence of Brackenholt authority. Isolde saw his eyes catch on it. His silence lasted only a few seconds. To her, it was long enough to become a second abandonment. I did not write that, she said. No one suggests Your Grace wrote it personally, Sir Algernon replied. Only that your needs required it. Leopold still had not spoken. Isolde reached for the paper. Lady Ashcombe made a little sound, as if paper might cut a sick woman. Isolde ignored her. She read the first line, the second, then the false title near the bottom. Lady Avelin. Again, the room waited for tears. She gave it accuracy. If I emptied a house, Sir Algernon, I would at least know the names of those I had dismissed. And if I gave an order as Duchess of Brackenholt, I would not sign away my own rank by allowing myself to be called Lady Aveline. Silence struck the room harder than any raised voice. The vicar's wife looked suddenly at the paper. Sir William frowned. Drusilla's hand tightened around her wineglass. Leopold's face changed, but too late to erase the hesitation Isolde had already felt. The title is wrong, he said. Yes, Isolde answered. She did not look at him. It has been wrong from the beginning. Sir Algernon recovered first. A clerkly error, Your Grace, hardly proof of malice. No, Isolde said. Not alone. She rose slowly. The movement cost her, and the room saw it. Let them. She steadied herself with 2 fingers on the table and looked at the empty chairs beside her. I thank Lady Ashcombe for the extra seats. They have made the evening's purpose plain. Drusilla stood as well. Dear Isolde, please don't distress yourself. Isolde turned to her. I am not distressed because you doubt me, Lady Drusilla. I am distressed because so many people find doubt convenient when a woman is pale enough to be pitied. Leopold stepped toward her. Isolde, her name spoken by him at last, moved through her like warmth arriving where she had forbidden it. She could not accept it now, not here, not while the room watched to see whether she would lean. Your Grace, she said, making the title a wall. I am ready to return to Mallowden. The carriage ride home began in near darkness. For several minutes, only the wheels spoke. Leopold sat opposite her, not beside her, because she had chosen that seat before he could offer anything. At last he said, "I should have answered faster." She looked out at the black hedgerows. "You answered as a duke. That is not enough." No, the word trembled less than her hands. He heard it. "I did not believe them." She turned then. "You wanted not to believe them. That is not the same as believing me." He absorbed the sentence as if it had entered beneath the ribs. "You are right." She had not expected agreement. It hurt more than denial would have. "You defended my rank," she said quietly. "You have not yet believed my word." Outside, far ahead beyond the dark road, one small light waited high in Mallowden's front window, kept burning by servants who had learned to expect her return. Isolde saw it and closed her fingers over her healed thumb. The house had answered. Her husband had not quickly enough, and in the narrow space between those two truths, the first real fracture of their marriage opened. Morning found Mallowden neither peaceful nor ruined, but suspended between the two, as if every corridor knew the county had begun speaking, and waited to learn whether the house would answer back. Isolde had slept little after the supper at Barrowdene. The empty chairs had followed her into dreams, arranged beside her bed like witnesses, prepared to call weakness by another name. At breakfast she drank tea she barely tasted and read the note. Mrs. Fenlo brought on a silver tray with the expression of a woman delivering bad weather. Lady Ashcombe, Mrs. Vellerton, the vicar's wife, and 2 other county ladies intended to call before noon. Under the guise of concern, naturally, Isolde folded the note once, then again. Her thumb no longer pained her, but she felt the memory of the burn when paper met skin. "They waste no time," she said. Mrs. Fenlo stood near the breakfast-room door, straight as a church pew. "No, Your Grace." "Have they sent cards properly?" "Lady Ashcombe's carriage brought them at 9. "Then we shall receive them properly, Mrs." Fenlo's face did not change, but her eyes moved toward Leopold, who stood by the window with the morning paper, unopened in his hand. Isolde had avoided looking at him since entering the room, not from theatrical injury. She had no patience for theatrical anything. She avoided him because the carriage ride home had left truth between them like a glass on the edge of a table. One careless movement and it would break. Leopold set the paper aside. "They are coming to measure whether last night weakened you. Then they will be disappointed to find I still understand furniture." Isolde, her name again, softer than it had been at supper, more dangerous because it no longer sounded accidental. She looked at him then. He had not shaved with his usual exactness. A faint darkness marked his jaw, and something sleepless shadowed his eyes. A lesser man might have worn guilt loudly, hoping to be forgiven for the display of it. Leopold wore it like an ill-fitted coat he had not yet learned to remove. "I failed you last night," he said. Mrs. Fenlo took one silent step backward, but Isolde lifted a hand. "Stay, Mrs. Fenlo. Nothing improper is being said." Leopold's mouth tightened, not in offense, but in recognition. "You should not need witnesses to make an apology safe." "No," Isolde said, "but I have learned to value witnesses." He accepted that. "I should have believed you faster, not because the title was wrong, not because the order looked suspicious. Before all that, the words touched the place she had kept guarded since the empty chairs. She did not allow them entry all at once. "Do you believe me now?" "Yes, even where you cannot yet explain every order. Yes, even if explanation embarrasses your house. My house is all ready. embarrassed if truth had to beg entry. A silence followed. It was not reconciliation. It was something more fragile and more useful, a plank laid across deep water. Isolde rose carefully. Then we receive the callers in the music room. He crossed the space between them, but stopped before he reached her. Together. The word could have been command, offer, or plea. This morning, he made it a question. Together, she said, if you remember that I am not evidence you are presenting. You are not, nor a patient you are displaying. No, nor a duchess whose rank you must defend while her word waits behind you. He bowed his head once. No, only then did she move toward the door. The old music room had been prepared with merciless care, not for comfort alone, and not for weakness. The chair Leopold had moved nearer the light during the parish meeting remained by the table, but Isolde had ordered 2 others placed beside it, so no one could point to hers as a sick-room throne. The cracked porcelain lamp stood unlit in the window, daylight resting on the painted swallows. The ledgers were closed. The recovered pegs remained wrapped and locked in the estate office for the moment, not displayed for curious ladies to misread before the proper time. Thomas Reeve had gone to meet the dismissed maid who claimed to have kept her transfer slip. Mrs. Fenlow waited near the door. When the first carriage sounded outside, Isolde felt her breath shorten. Not enough to show, enough to know. Leopold noticed. She saw the effort it took him not to speak too quickly. Instead, he extended his hand. He did not reach for hers. He simply offered his own, palm turned slightly upward in the space between them. "Before they come in," he said quietly, "I believe you did not empty this house." Her gaze dropped to his hand, a hand offered before all proof was safe. That was either courage or performance. Last night, he had wanted to believe her. Today he had chosen the words before the room demanded them. Isolde looked from his hand to his face. "If I take it, they will think you have forgiven me for something. Then let them be wrong where we are right." The answer was not perfect. It was better than safety. It contained risk. Isolde placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers with restrained steadiness, not ownership, not rescue. Her hand was cold, his was warm. For a moment, the sensation frightened her more than the county ladies waiting at the door, because it asked nothing and therefore could not be resisted with pride. "Do not speak over me," she said. "I won't. Do not turn me into your proof. I won't. And if I need to sit, I will sit. Yes." Mrs. Fenlow opened the door. The county went in silk, lace, scent, and concern. Lady Ashcombe led them, her expression tender enough to curdle milk. Behind her came Mrs. Vellerton, whose husband owned land near the lower road, then the vicar's wife, who looked uncomfortable but present, and 2 ladies Isolde knew only by face. Their eyes fell at once to the joined hands. A little ripple passed through them, not scandal, curiosity, calculation. Lady Ashcombe curtsied. "Your Graces, we hope we do not intrude. After last night, we were anxious to know how dear her Grace does." Isolde felt Leopold's hand remain steady. He did not answer. He let the silence come to her. "Dear her Grace does well enough to receive callers who sent cards," Isolde said. "Please sit." Mrs. Vellerton glanced toward the lamp. "How charming. The village says there is always a light now. Quite poetic." "Practical," Isolde said. "The upper window can be seen from the lower road. So I have heard. One almost wonders whether the gesture invites comment." Many things invite comment when a woman is newly married and expected to vanish. Lady Ashcombe's smile tightened. "No one wishes you to vanish. Then you will be pleased to find me visible." Leopold's thumb moved once against the side of Isolde's glove, not a caress, too slight for anyone else to read. A signal, perhaps, or a response he had not meant to give. Isolde did not look at him, but she did not withdraw. Lady Ashcombe took the chair opposite. We were distressed by the confusion at supper. Sir Algernon is a most respectable man. It would be unfortunate if household economies were mistaken for cruelty. It would be more unfortunate, Isolde replied, if cruelty learned to spell itself as economy. Mrs. Vellerton shifted. But surely, Your Grace, if the house was made quiet for your health, then one might wonder why no one asked me what my health required. The vicar's wife raised her eyes at that. Something like shame crossed her face. Lady Ashcombe looked to Leopold, clearly expecting the husband to soften the wife. He did not. Her Grace has answered, he said. 4 words, no thunder, no interruption. A wall placed exactly where needed. The call continued for 20 minutes. Every polite inquiry carried a hook. Did Her Grace sleep? Did Her Grace receive too many papers? Did Her Grace find the servants noisy now that some were returning? Was His Grace not concerned? Isolde answered each one, sometimes seated, sometimes silent, always present. Leopold spoke only when a question attempted to pass around her. His hand held hers through the first wave, visible on the edge of her chair, a fact no one in the room could quite reduce to pity. When the ladies finally rose, Lady Ashcombe paused near the door. County society can be slow to understand new arrangements. Isolde withdrew her hand from Leopold's before answering, not sharply, freely. His fingers opened at once. The release mattered as much as the holding had. Then county society may take its time, she said. Mallowden has lost enough by hurrying to believe what was convenient. After they left, the room seemed larger. Isolde looked down at her hand, feeling the ghost of his warmth beneath her glove. Leopold stood beside her, not touching now. I should have believed you before the room made belief difficult, he said. She closed her fingers once, then let them rest. Yes, I know that is not repaired because I say it. Good. A footstep sounded in the passage. Thomas entered, breathless and bright-eyed, holding a folded paper as if it might fly apart. Your Grace, Your Grace. Ruth Ellaby kept her transfer slip. It is dated 5 days before the wedding. Isolde rose. This time she did not need the chair. Then the house began emptying before I had a room in it. Leopold's face hardened with certainty at last, and before anyone could claim you ordered it. Thomas nodded. There is more. She says Sir Algernon told her not to return unless summoned, and that Lady Drusilla herself said a quiet house would suit the new Duchess better than a truthful one. The words settled into the room. The lamp waited in the window, unlit but no longer silent. Isolde looked at Leopold. He did not reach for her hand again. He had learned, at least for this hour, that support offered once did not purchase the right to take. Now, she said, belief must become action. He bowed his head. Tell me where to stand. By nightfall on the 19th day. The servants' passage had become more dangerous to Sir Algernon Pithwick than any drawing-room in Hampshire. It was only a board on a wall, only polished wood and rows of peg-holes. But every empty place now had a history, and every restored name had begun to look less like housekeeping than testimony. Thomas Reeve had spent the afternoon comparing Ruth Ellaby's transfer slip with the copied orders, while Mrs. Fenlow wrapped the recovered pegs in linen and locked them in the estate office under a key that stayed on her own ring. Isolde had ordered it so after asking Leopold whether Sir Algernon still possessed any duplicate key. Leopold had answered, with visible displeasure at his own ignorance, that he did not know. That was the trouble with old authority. It assumed doors were secure because they had always obeyed. Isolde did not assume. She had lived too long with arrangements made in other people's voices. After the county ladies left and Thomas brought Ruth's slip, a strange energy had run through Mallowden. Not joy, not yet. It was the careful urgency of a house, realizing that truth could be lost if not guarded before dawn. Leopold wanted to send immediately for the solicitor from Alresford, to seal the office, to take statements, to place every ledger under ducal hand. Isolde listened while seated beside the music room table, her face pale with weariness, then said, "If you gather every paper before every person understands why, Sir Algernon will claim I am being managed by my husband, and that the servants are being frightened into obedience." Leopold's reply had been slow. "Then what do you propose? Names first, documents second, witnesses third." That gives him time. So does secrecy. He had looked at her for a long moment, and she saw the command rise in him, then saw him master it. Very well. Names first. That had been hours ago. Now the house slept uneasily. The cracked porcelain lamp burned in the upper front window, its small flame turning the dark glass gold, and Isolde, who had promised Mrs. Fenlo she would rest, found herself awake in the chamber that still did not feel entirely like hers. She heard the disturbance just before midnight. One muted thud from below, then another, then the sharp whisper of a door forced shut too quickly. She sat up, breath caught tight in her chest. A moment later, footsteps crossed the corridor outside. Not hurried servants. A man trying to move as if he had a right to silence. Isolde rose, wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, and opened her door. At the far end of the passage, a light flared and vanished. By the time she reached the servants' stair, Leopold was already below, his candle held high, his dressing coat thrown over his shirt, his face stripped of every polite expression. Thomas stood in the lower passage in his stocking feet, hair disordered, staring at the wall. Mrs. Fenlefaux held one hand against her throat. The household name board was gone. Its outline remained on the wall in a paler rectangle, surrounded by rows of naked peg holes. For several seconds no one spoke. The absence was obscene. It was one thing to find a house emptied before one arrived. It was another to watch its restored names stolen after they had dared to return. "Who was on watch?" Leopold asked. His voice was controlled enough to frighten. James appeared at the end of the passage, white-faced. "I was in the hall until 11, Your Grace. Mr. Pithwick's clerk came earlier with a message that the estate office lock was sticking. Mr. Reeve went to look, and I thought—" "You thought?" Leopold turned. James flinched before a word had struck him. Isolde saw it and raised her hand. "Not yet." Leopold looked at her. "The board is gone." "Yes, and if fear is the method, we must not become another form of it." Thomas swallowed. "The estate office cupboard was open, Your Grace. The linen bundle of pegs is still there, but the board was taken from the wall. Someone wanted the names without the witness of where they had been." "Sir Algernon," Leopold said. Isolde touched the bare wall. The dust line marked the board's old edges. Tiny splinters clung near 2 of the screw holes, perhaps, but we will prove what he touched, not what we know in anger. Footsteps sounded from the back corridor. Sir Algernon entered with his coat buttoned and his hair too orderly for a man unexpectedly roused. "Your Grace, I came as soon as I heard. Most distressing. A rotten board, I should think. These old passages are damp. Perhaps it fell, and some servant removed it without understanding its sentimental value." Mrs. Fenlo's head lifted. "It did not fall, sir." Sir Algernon smiled at her with professional pity. My dear Mrs. Fenlo, you are understandably disturbed. Isolde turned from the wall. Do not make grief look like confusion, Sir Algernon. It is impolite and worse, inaccurate. His smile held, but only just. Your Grace, I would never imply. You implied enough. Leopold stepped beside her. Who authorized you to enter this passage after hours? I did not enter it, Your Grace. I was in the estate office, reviewing records at your request. At midnight? Given the urgency created by Her Grace's inquiries, I felt duty required diligence. Isolde looked at his boots. A faint smear of pale plaster marked one heel. She said nothing. Not yet. Sir Algernon followed her gaze and moved his foot back half an inch. There it was. Panic, quickly hidden. The board may have been taken for firewood, he said. If the house is so pressed for economy, one cannot blame servants for practical decisions. Thomas made a sharp sound. No servant here would burn names. Sir Algernon turned on him. You would be wise, Reeve, to remember your mother's cottage depends upon regular tenancy. Leopold's candle did not move, but every face in the passage changed. The threat had stepped into the open. That cottage, Leopold said, is under my direct review from this hour. You will not speak of it again. Sir Algernon bowed. As your Grace wishes. No, Isolde said. Leopold turned his head toward her. Not only as his Grace wishes. Put it in writing before breakfast. Thomas Reeve's mother is not to be touched, warned, removed, threatened, inspected for irregularity, or made answerable for her son's honesty without my knowledge and the Duke's written permission. Sir Algernon's eyes cooled. Your Grace has gained a taste for administration. I have gained a distaste for cowardice. The words landed cleanly. Mrs. Fenlo drew one breath as if she had been holding it for years. Sir Algernon bowed again, lower this time, then withdrew with the same careful steps by which he had entered. No one mistook departure for defeat. He will destroy it, Thomas said, if he has not already. Isolde looked at the bare wall. A woman weaker from pride alone might have waited for Leopold's solicitor, Leopold's orders, Leopold's restoration. She felt his presence beside her, powerful and ready, and knew how easy it would be to let that power replace her own. Instead, she turned toward the entrance hall. Mrs. Fenlo, wake only those already involved. No one is to be dragged from bed for spectacle. Thomas, bring a clean ledger. James, light the hall lamps. Leopold frowned. Isolde, you are exhausted. Yes. Then delay until morning. No, the refusal was quiet. It did not need height. If the board can be stolen at night, the names will be spoken before morning. She walked to the entrance hall because it was the one place every person entering Mallowden had to pass. The stone floor was cold beneath her slippers. The lamp in the upper window threw only a faint reflection down the stairwell. But James lit 2 hall lamps, then 4, until the portraits emerged from darkness. Mrs. Fenlo arrived with Mary, Alice, and the groom from the stable. Thomas brought the clean ledger, ink, and sand. Isolde stood beside the marble table, where stale calling cards had once curled in neglect. We will begin with those present, she said. Name, office, date retained or dismissed, wages owed if known, and whether any order was given in my name before I arrived. Mary's eyes filled. Your Grace, now. Isolde's voice softened. Not because you owe me courage tonight. Because if names can be stolen from wood, they must be kept somewhere no thief can pry from a wall. One by one they spoke. Mrs. Elspeth Fenlo, housekeeper, 34 years in service to Mallowden. Thomas Reeve, under steward, retained but denied full accounts. Mary Bell, housemaid, wages short 3 weeks. Alice Dunn, lady's maid by temporary appointment, meals reduced before her Grace's arrival. James Orren, footman, voice shaking, as he admitted he had delivered Isolde's first letter, not to the post, but to a groom from Lady Drusilla's household, because he had been told his place depended on obedience. Isolde did not forgive him aloud. She did not condemn him either. She said, "Write it." Thomas wrote until the page looked less like a list and more like a door opening. Near dawn, when the sky began to pale behind the high window, Leopold returned from the old chapel wing with dust on his sleeve and 2 footmen behind him, carrying the household name-board. It was intact, hidden behind unused chapel screens. But fresh knife marks scarred the wood where someone had tried to force out the remaining peg labels. Mrs. Fenlow covered her mouth. Thomas gripped the ledger. Isolde looked at the damaged board, then at Leopold. He did not present it like a triumph. He set it gently on the hall table before her, as if returning a wounded thing to the person who had first recognized it as living. "You were right not to wait," he said. Isolde touched one knife mark. "No, we were right to listen." The lamp still burned above them, pale now against the first light of day, while below it the stolen board, the spoken ledger, and the living witnesses of Mallowden waited for a reckoning that no one could call quiet again. By the morning of the 21st day, Mallowden no longer looked empty, and that made its wounds more visible. Lamps burned in the lower hall, though dawn had already entered. The recovered name-board lay across the old music-room table, its polished face scarred by fresh knife marks, while beside it rested Thomas Reeves' spoken name ledger, Ruth Ellaby's transfer slip, the lamp oil, accounts, the room closure inventories, and the first replies from dismissed servants who had dared trust paper again. Mrs. Fenlow stood near the open door with the dignity of a guard at a chapel threshold. She had placed herself there without being asked, because propriety still mattered, and because truth, once stolen in darkness, deserved witnesses in daylight. Isolde sat by the window with the cracked porcelain lamp before her, unlit now, its painted swallows pale beneath the grey morning. She had slept only 2 hours after the night of the stolen board. Fatigue lay under her skin like cold water. Yet her mind was clear. That clarity frightened her more than weakness. A tired woman could be persuaded to rest. A clear one must decide what pain required next. Leopold entered without ceremony, but not without permission. He paused at the threshold until Mrs. Fenlow inclined her head and Isolde looked up. Only then did he come in. He wore the same black coat he had worn through half the night, brushed but not fresh, and there was dust still caught at the edge of one cuff from the chapel screens where he had found the board. He carried no paper in his hand. That was the first thing she noticed. He had evidence enough to make a case, authority enough to command a room, rank enough to make half the county apologize before it understood the charge. Yet he came to her empty-handed. "May I speak with you?" he asked. Isolde rested her fingers on the table near the damaged board. "Mrs. Fenlow will remain." I hoped she would. The answer altered something in the air. Mrs. Fenlow lowered her eyes, but did not move. Leopold stepped to the far side of the table, leaving the recovered board between them. He looked at it for a long moment before he looked at his wife. "I found it behind the old chapel screens because my father used to hide broken things there until someone decided whether they could be repaired or should be thrown away." "And which is this?" Isolde asked. "Evidence." His voice deepened, and shame. She did not rescue him from the word. A woman too often praised for gentleness could be made responsible for softening every truth that hurt a man. Isolde had no strength left for that old charity. Leopold placed his hand on the back of the chair opposite her, but he did not sit. I owe you an apology before I owe you explanation. Her eyes remained on his face. Then give me the apology first. He accepted the correction with a slight bow of his head. I left you here. The words were simple. They did not hide inside circumstance. I brought you to Mallowden as my wife, and left you in a house I had allowed others to prepare as if you were an inconvenience to be managed. I accepted quiet as kindness because it suited my cowardice. I accepted Lady Drusilla's reports because they allowed me to be dutiful at a distance. I accepted Sir Algernon's administration because command is easier when one never asks whom it has wounded. Isolde felt her breath move unevenly once. She did not speak. I am sorry, Leopold said, not only for the night I left, for the days before it, when I let your illness be described to me by everyone but you, for the supper at Barrowdene, when I defended your rank before I had the courage to trust your word, for every moment in which I mistook absence for care. Mrs. Fenlo was utterly still by the door. Outside the window, a stable boy crossed the yard carrying a bucket, glanced up toward the front glass where the lamp usually burned, and went on. Isolde saw him and understood that the house had begun to expect light from her, even now, even when she was exhausted. She wondered whether she resented that. She wondered whether she loved it. You said Mallowden was empty because you allowed duty to replace presence, she said. Yes, that is a clean sentence. It does not make the thing clean. No. His fingers tightened once on the chair back, then released. I am not asking it to. She looked down at the board. The knife marks had cut through 2 old names and grazed the line where Mrs. Barden's peg had been restored. If you had come back and found me weeping, would you have believed faster? The question entered quietly, but Leopold flinched as if it had been shouted. I do not know. That is the first answer. The honest one. Yes. She touched the cracked edge of the lamp base. I have spent much of my life discovering that a woman who does not collapse is considered unhurt, and a woman who does collapse is considered unreliable. It leaves very little room to be believed. Leopold's face changed, not dramatically. He was not a man made for theatrical remorse, but the control in him gave way just enough for grief to show through. Then tell me what room I may make now. Isolde almost closed her eyes. Room, not rescue, not command, not allow me to fix this. A question shaped like a threshold. You may begin by not asking what you may do for me, she said. Ask what I authorize. He swallowed. What do you authorize? She looked at the evidence gathered on the table. Lady Drusilla and Sir Algernon expect a drawing-room confrontation. They expect to choose chairs, witnesses, and language. They expect you to thunder. They expect me to sit, looking pale while documents are explained around me. They will be disappointed. Only if we refuse the room they have prepared. He grew very still. She saw his understanding begin before she explained. This house was emptied room by room. It will answer room by room. We will not hold a trial in the drawing room. We will walk the house. The first sheeted sitting room, the servants' passage, the lamp closet, the music room. Every door will open to the thing done behind it. Leopold looked at her as if the plan had struck deeper than any accusation. A house walk of lamps. Yes, Mrs. Fenlo will light the first after mine. Thomas will bring the ledger. The solicitor must stand where he can see the tags and the board. The vicar may hear testimony from servants who fear estate revenge. County witnesses may follow, but they will not preside. And me, his voice was low, where do you authorize me to stand? The old wound in her wanted to answer coldly. Behind me, where you placed yourself when you left. Before me, where you hesitated at supper. Away from me, where it cannot hurt. Instead, she told the truth that cost more. Beside me, not in front. Leopold bowed his head, and when he raised it, his eyes were bright with something he refused to spend cheaply. Beside you. If I tire, I will sit. Yes, if I speak, you will not. Finish my sentence. No, if your house is shamed, you will not look for a softer word. I will not. And if proof exposes not only Sir Algernon and Lady Drusilla, but you, then the house will hear that too. The answer loosened a knot inside her that she had not known her body was still holding. The breath she took turned into a cough, brief but sharp enough to bend her toward the table. Leopold moved one step, then stopped himself so abruptly that Mrs. Fenlo looked at him. Isolde recovered, one hand pressed to her ribs. His restraint hurt her more tenderly than any touch might have done. You may offer the chair, she said, almost inaudibly. Not order it. He drew the chair near as he had done before and stepped back. She sat. The small act steadied them both. For a few moments, no one spoke. The rain began then, fine against the window, blurring the yard beyond. Leopold looked at the cracked lamp. I returned to find a lamp in my window, he said, and realized I had never given anyone reason to keep one for me. Isolde's hands stilled. The words were not a declaration, but they stood dangerously close to one. Do not make me the cure for a lonely house, she said. I would rather not be used so beautifully. No, his voice roughened. You are not the cure. You are the person who told me the illness had a name. Her eyes burned suddenly, and she hated that the body could betray composure with water as easily as with weakness. She rose before caution could argue. Leopold did not move. He let her cross the small distance between them. That, too, was a kind of answer. Isolde placed her arms around him first. The embrace was awkward for half a breath because neither of them had rehearsed tenderness. Then Leopold held her, carefully, as if both fragility and strength deserved respect. He did not gather her close enough to claim. He did not speak above her hair. He simply remained. For the first time since her wedding, Isolde allowed herself to lean without feeling diminished. Then he released first, exactly as he should. She stepped back. The space between them changed but not erased. Then stand with me when the house speaks, she said. At that moment, carriage wheels sounded on the wet gravel outside. Mrs. Fenlo turned from the door. Lady Drusilla, Dowager Lady Khan, Sir Algernon, and several county carriages, Your Grace. Isolde lifted the cracked lamp from the table. Its unlit glass caught the morning grey. She turned to the housekeeper. Mrs. Fenlo, light mine first. Then light every lamp that has been kept dark. The county arrived expecting a room and found a house waiting instead. Carriage after carriage drew up before Mallowden beneath a rain-washed sky, bringing Lady Drusilla Khan in dove silk, Dowager Lady Khan in severe black lace, Sir Algernon Pithwick with a dispatch case pressed under one arm, Lady Ashcombe, Mrs. Vellerton, the vicar, Mr. Anstruther, and the solicitor from Alresford, Mr. Bellamy, summoned so hastily that his boots still carried road mud at the edges. Behind them came witnesses who looked less polished and more necessary. Ruth Ellerby, the dismissed still-room maid, John Pike, the second footman named falsely in the oil ledger, Old Mister, Rail the butler, thinner than his years should have made him, and 2 tenant messengers who had seen Mallowden dark from the lower road. No one was shown into the drawing-room. No tea was poured. No hostess arranged conversation into safer shapes. Mrs. Fenlo received them in the entrance hall, where every lamp along the walls had been lit, and the recovered household name board stood covered beneath a plain linen cloth on the marble table. Isolde waited at the foot of the staircase, with the cracked porcelain window lamp in both hands, its flame newly kindled, the painted swallows flickering in and out of gold. She had dressed in deep blue again, because she refused the white of invalid innocence and the black of social mourning. The effort of standing showed only in the discipline of her shoulders. Leopold stood beside her, not before her, his face unreadable to the room and painfully clear to her. He had not touched her since the embrace in the music room. That restraint was not distance now. It was a promise held in public form. Drusilla's gaze moved from Isolde to the lamps and back again. "How dramatic," she said gently, for gentleness had always been her sharpest blade. "Dear Isolde, are you certain you're strong enough for such theatrics?" Isolde felt the question pass through the gathered people, offering them permission to turn concern into doubt. Her fingers tightened around the porcelain base. The lamp was not heavy, but fatigue had begun to make even light feel weighty. Leopold's attention shifted toward her at once. He did not speak over her. He bent slightly, so only she could hear. "Do you wish to sit, delay, or stop?" There was no impatience in it, no fear of embarrassment, only the question, clean and waiting. Isolde looked toward the first closed door, the sheeted sitting room where the inventory tag had already told the truth to those willing to read dates. "I wish to begin, then begin." She drew in a careful breath and moved toward the old music room threshold first, not because the inquiry would start there, but because for one moment she needed the shelter of the room that had become witness to everything unsaid between them. Leopold followed only as far as the shadow beside the door. The others remained in the hall, murmuring under candlelight. Mrs. Fenlo understood without being told and turned slightly, giving them privacy without abandoning propriety. Leopold's voice was low. "Isolde." She looked up. The sound of her name had changed since Barrowdene. There, it had arrived too late to save trust. Here, it came before the door opened, before proof made her safe, before the room decided whether to pity or condemn. "Yes?" He did not step closer. "May I kiss you?" The question went through her with such quiet force that the hall seemed to fall away. Not because no man had ever asked, because this man, who had once left her in an empty manor, believing arrangement was mercy, now asked as if her answer mattered more than his longing, more than his guilt, more than the eyes waiting beyond the door. "Not to give me courage," she said. "No." His voice was rough but steady. "You have your own. Not to claim me before them." "No." "Then why?" He looked toward the lamp in her hands, then back to her face. "Because I was not beside you when I should have been. Because I am beside you now. Because when that door opens, I want you to know I am here by your leave, not by my right." The answer did not heal everything. It did something more trustworthy. It did not pretend everything had vanished. Isolde stepped closer, only one step. "Enough. Then yes." He bent his head slowly, giving her time even after she had spoken. She rose the little distance she could, and their lips met in a kiss so brief and restrained that no scandal could have been made of it by any honest witness. Yet it altered the whole house for her. There was no command in it, no hunger dressed as entitlement. It was warmth held carefully between two people who had learned the cost of taking without asking. When he drew back, he did so first, as he had promised with every act of restraint before this one. Isolde's breath trembled once. She did not apologize for it. "Now," she said. Leopold's eyes held hers. "Now." They returned to the hall together. and Isolde saw that Drusilla had noticed the changed colour in her face, though not the reason. The cousin's mouth curved faintly. If her grace must retire, no one will think less of her. I have not yet opened the first door, Isolde said. It would be premature to retire before the house has spoken. The solicitor adjusted his spectacles. The vicar folded his hands. Sir Algernon stood too near his dispatch case, as if leather and copied paper might save him from walls, dates, and human memory. Isolde carried the lamp to the first sheeted sitting room. The key was already in the lock, placed there by Mrs. Fenlow before the witnesses arrived. Isolde did not ask Leopold to turn it. She opened the door herself. The smell of covered upholstery, dust, and cold ashes drifted out. 2 lamps had been set inside but not lit. White sheets lay over chairs, tables, and a cabinet where porcelain had been wrapped away with military precision. On the largest chair hung a brown paper inventory tag, tied with string. Thomas Reeve stepped forward, ledger ready. Isolde lifted the lamp so its flame fell across the tag. Mr. Bellamy, would you read the date aloud? The solicitor leaned in. 4th of October, 1843. Lady Ashcombe frowned. That must be before my arrival, Isolde said. Before my wedding. Before I gave any instruction at Mallowden. Old Mr. Rail, the dismissed butler, took one trembling step forward. I wrote that tag, Your Grace, under order from Sir Algernon's office. I was told the new Duchess must find the room already closed, so she wouldn't be distressed by choices. The word choices moved through the hall like a draught under a door. Leopold's face hardened, but he remained silent. Sir Algernon gave a short bow toward the solicitor. An overzealous precaution, nothing more. A house of Mallowden's age has many unused rooms. Isolde looked at him. Then, why was this one closed in my name? He opened his mouth. Before he could answer, Drusilla gave a soft laugh. My dear, you cannot object to people preparing comfort for you. I object, Isolde said, to comfort that arrives before I am asked and becomes accusation after I question it. Mrs. Fenlow, standing in the doorway, took the second lamp and lit it from Isolde's flame. The room changed at once. Chairs emerged from their sheets. The cabinet glass flashed. The tag no longer looked like a dull scrap of paper. It looked like a date nailed to a lie. Isolde turned to the witnesses. This is the first room, not the last. They moved next toward the servants' passage, but before the hall fully shifted, Leopold spoke. Mr. Bellamy, record that the room was closed 7 days before Her Grace entered Mallowden, and that Mr. Rail identifies the order as coming through Sir Algernon's office. He stopped, then looked to Isolde. If Her Grace authorizes the record. The solicitor paused, pen waiting. Every eye moved to her. Isolde felt the moment settle into place. Not rescue, not performance. Partnership, publicly corrected before it was publicly praised. I authorize it, she said. Leopold inclined his head and stepped back to her side. Sir Algernon's face tightened. Drusilla's fan stilled. In the servants' passage, beyond, the bare wall waited with its rows of holes, and on the marble table under linen, the wounded name-board waited to be uncovered. Isolde adjusted her grip on the cracked lamp. Its flame moved, but did not fail. She had opened the first door herself. Now the house knew how to continue. The servants' passage was narrow enough that rank could not arrange itself comfortably there. That was why Isolde had chosen it. In a drawing-room, Lady Drusilla Carne might have turned her head by degrees and made pity look like command. Sir Algernon Pithwick might have placed papers on polished rosewood and called theft administration. Dowager Lady Carne might have sighed until cruelty wore the shawl of family concern. But in the servants' passage, with lamps burning along the whitewashed wall, and the smell of wax, old wood, and damp wool rising from the gathered witnesses. Every person had to stand close to what had been done. Isolde the cracked porcelain lamp to the bare rectangle where the household name-board had hung. Its flame trembled once as the passage door opened behind them, and rain-cooled air moved through. Leopold came to her side, not ahead of her. Thomas Reeve set the spoken name ledger on a small table. Mrs. Fenlow removed the linen from the recovered board. A murmur travelled through the county witnesses. The board was not rotten. It had not fallen. It lay before them scarred by fresh knife marks, its rows of holes plain, its missing pegs wrapped beside it like bones gathered after a storm. Mr. Bellamy, the solicitor, bent over the wall. "The screw marks correspond," he said. "This board was removed from here recently." Thomas unfolded his charcoal, rubbing with hands that shook only at the edges. "I took this before the board was stolen, sir. Her Grace asked that all marks be copied because loose things disappear in this house." Sir Algernon gave a controlled laugh, a dramatic turn of phrase from a young man eager for promotion. Isolde looked at him. Mr. Reeve had more to lose by truth than by silence. That is why his courage interests me more than your contempt. The vicar's wife drew in a small breath. Ruth Ellaby, standing near Mrs. Fenlow, lifted her chin. Leopold said nothing. He allowed Isolde's words to remain hers. Mr. Bellamy compared the rubbing, the board and the wall. The peg holes align. The removed labels appear forced out by a knife. "A knife held by sentiment?" Isolde asked Sir Algernon. "Or by economy?" His face tightened. "Your Grace mistakes unfortunate management for malice." "No," she said. "I mistake nothing. That has been the inconvenience from the beginning." She turned to the gathered servants. Mrs. Fenlow read the first name restored. The housekeeper's voice trembled, then strengthened. "Mrs. Barden, cook, 21 years at Mallowden, dismissed by economy order before Her Grace arrived." "Mr. Rail," Isolde said. The old butler stepped forward, his thin hands folded over his hat. "I was ordered to close the east sitting room on the 4th of October, Your Grace." Sir Algernon's clerk said the new Duchess was not to be troubled by choice. "Had I arrived?" "No, Your Grace." "Had I spoken with you?" "No, Your Grace." "Had I dismissed Mrs. Barden?" "No, Your Grace." Each answer struck the wall harder than accusation. They moved next to the lamp closet, a low room off the back corridor, where shelves held trimmed wicks, glass chimneys, and cans marked for delivery. John Pike, the dismissed second footman, stood beside the oil ledger and stared at the signature that claimed his hand. "I couldn't have signed that, Your Grace," he said. "I was at my mother's house by then. I have her parish note to say so." Mr. Anstruther took the note and passed it to the solicitor. Ruth Ellaby's statement followed. Then the ledger entries. Oil charged to John after dismissal. Oil charged to Ruth after dismissal. Oil charged for rooms sheeted and dark. Oil enough to light Mallowden twice over, while its windows had stood black before a bride. Sir Algernon's composure thinned. Household books often contain errors. Leopold spoke then, quiet enough that everyone leaned toward the words. "Errors do not threaten cottages when questioned." Thomas looked down. Isolde turned to him. "Speak what was said." Thomas swallowed. "Sir Algernon told me my mother's cottage lease might be found irregular if I continued troubling old accounts." "I advised caution," Sir Algernon snapped. "You threatened dependence," Isolde said. "There is a difference. The poor know it better than gentlemen." Dowager Lady Khan stiffened. "This tone is unbecoming in a duchess." Leopold looked at the older woman. What is unbecoming is teaching a duchess that silence is her duty, while others profit from it. Drusilla's fan opened with a crack. Leopold, surely you see what is happening. Her Grace has been encouraged into agitation. We wished only for calm. I recommended quiet because she looked so frail. Everyone saw it. I said a small household might spare her distress, nothing more. Isolde lifted the lamp a little higher. Its light struck Drusilla's face, beautiful, pale, and suddenly less certain. Then we come to the question I have waited to ask. If this house was emptied for my comfort, why was I the last person told whom I had supposedly dismissed? The passage fell silent. Even the rain at the windows seemed to recede. Drusilla's lips parted. Sir Algernon looked toward the ledger. Dowager Lady Khan said, "Too late. A young bride need not be troubled with every arrangement. A duchess need not be erased by arrangements made in her name," Isolde answered. Mrs. Fenlo opened another paper. Lady Drusilla's note to Sir Algernon's clerk, Your Grace, found copied among the quiet household memoranda. Mr. Bellamy read aloud, his voice dry and exact. Her Grace's appearance will make the matter credible. Fewer servants, fewer callers, no unnecessary household motion. His Grace must not be distressed by scenes. The house should teach her rest before she learns authority. Drusilla went white. That was private concern. No, Leopold said. That was instruction. Sir Algernon turned on her. You wrote the recommendations. I merely regularized them. Drusilla's fan lowered. You charged oil, never delivered. You kept wages. You hid the pegs. At your urging to maintain quiet. Enough, Leopold said, and the word carried the full weight of the title he had refused to misuse until that moment. Sir Algernon Pithwick, your authority at Mallowden is withdrawn. Mr. Bellamy will secure the estate office and prepare accounts for restitution and legal review. Every wage withheld will be paid. Every servant dismissed under false order will receive a corrected character and quarter recommendation. Thomas Reeves' mother's cottage is under ducal protection and will not be used as a leash against him. Sir Algernon bowed stiffly, but no bow could restore him. Your Grace acts under emotion. No, Leopold said. I acted under emotion when I believed absence was care because it spared me discomfort. This is evidence. He turned then, not to the witnesses, but to Isolde. His face changed, and the corridor changed with it. The first wrong was mine. A stir passed through the servants, the county ladies, the solicitor, the vicar. Leopold did not soften the sentence. I left my wife in a house others had emptied because I mistook absence for care. I let her illness be translated by those who wished to use it. I defended her title before I trusted her word. Let every person here understand that House Avelin's failure began with me. Isolde felt the lamp grow heavy in her hands, not because her strength had vanished, though fatigue pressed close, because public truth had a weight no private apology could carry for it. Leopold stepped nearer, still leaving her the space to refuse him before everyone. Isolde, he said, and her name, spoken there among the restored and the wronged, sounded like the final peg returned to its place. I love you. I loved you first, as the woman who kept one lamp burning in a house I had allowed to go dark. I love you now as the woman who made truth welcome here. Tears stung her eyes. She did not hide them. Hiding had served too many lies. She set the cracked lamp on the small table beside the recovered board and placed her hand over his where it rested near the knife marks. The gesture was public, restrained, and entirely her own. I love you, Leopold, she said. His breath changed. She felt it beneath her palm. But I will love you as your equal, not as a woman grateful to be believed late. his hand turned under hers, not gripping, only receiving. "As my equal," he said, "before every room in this house." The words moved through Mallowden like lamps catching one from another. Mrs. Fenlow pressed Mrs. Barden's peg back into the board. Thomas added Ruth Ellaby's name to the ledger as witness, not servant. Mr. Bellamy sealed Sir Algernon's dispatch case. Drusilla stood silent at last, her concern stripped of language. When the witnesses began to disperse, Isolde reached for the porcelain lamp, but her strength faltered. The flame swayed. Leopold offered his arm, not command, not claim, simply steadiness. Isolde looked at it, then at him, and placed her hand there by choice. Together, they carried the light from the passage into the hall, while behind them, the house that had been made empty filled itself with names. 4 weeks after the house walk of lamps, Mallowden Manor no longer startled when it heard footsteps. That was how Isolde first understood that the house had changed. Doors opened without the flinch of secrecy. Bells rang and were answered. The kitchen sent up the smell of bread before dawn, not because a duchess required display, but because Mrs. Barden had returned to her range and declared that no household of hers would begin the day on cold crusts. The servants' passage, once stripped into a row of accusing holes, held the restored name-board in its old place. Its knife marks remained visible. Isolde had refused to have them polished away. "A house that forgets its scars becomes too easy to flatter," she had said, and Mrs. Fenlow had nodded, as if the sentence belonged in the household book beside rules for linen, candles, and winter stores. Sir Algernon Pithwick was gone. Mr. Bellamy of Alresford had secured the estate office, reviewed the oil charges, and sent documents toward formal legal action with all the dry precision that made fraud look smaller than it had seemed when wrapped in authority. Withheld wages had been paid in full. Corrected characters had been written for every servant dismissed under false order. John Pike had returned to service at Mallowden. Ruth Ellaby had chosen a place in the still room, after Isolde asked whether she wished to return, rather than assuming gratitude would answer for her. Old Mr. Rail, too proud to resume the butler's office after being made to weep in the passage, had accepted a pension and came twice a week to instruct Thomas Reeve in the older customs of the house. Thomas himself had been confirmed as steward, though he still looked startled whenever anyone called him Mr. Reeve, with the respect due the title. His mother's cottage lease had been rewritten in clean terms, and lodged where Sir Algernon's shadow could not reach it. Lady Drusilla Khan and Dowager Lady Khan had left Hampshire within 5 days of the reckoning, under the excuse of visiting relations in Bath. No one believed the excuse. Fewer people received them than before. Lady Ashcombe called once to express regret so carefully worded that it apologized for confusion without naming her part in it. Isolde received her for 12 minutes, seated near the music-room window, then sent her away with courtesy sharp enough to leave no blood and no invitation. The county learned, slowly, because counties often did. The Thursday petitions continued. The parish roof was repaired. Mrs. Vale's children received boots before the first hard frost. The lamp oil ledger was replaced with one Thomas designed himself, with every delivery signed by 2 hands and checked against rooms actually lit. Leopold approved the system only after Isolde did. That, more than any public speech, told the household the change was not ceremonial. On the afternoon that marked 4 weeks since the public reckoning, Isolde stood in the old music room, while November rain tapped softly at the window and watched Leopold lay 2 papers on the table. He had not come with a tray of jewels. He had not brought some lavish feminine consolation meant to transform harm into romance by expense. The first paper acknowledged, under his signature and seal, her full authority over Mallowden's domestic household, charitable disbursements, servant appointments, and room use. The second settled a separate income upon her, not as pin money doled by affection, but as independent provision secured through the marriage settlements amendment. "This should have existed before you had reason to require it," he said. Isolde read every line before she answered. He did not hurry her. That was one of the ways she had come to trust him. He had learned to let silence belong to thought rather than fear. "You understand this is not forgiveness written in legal hand?" she asked. "Yes." He stood across the table from her, not hiding from the answer. "It is structure. Forgiveness is yours if and when you give it. Authority should not have had to wait for tenderness." She touched the seal. The red wax bore the Aveline arms, pressed cleanly beside her own newly cut cipher. "And if I choose to reopen rooms you would rather leave closed, then I shall ask why. I will not forbid the door. And if I close one, then I shall ask whether it is rest, strategy, or pain. I will not call it nerves." Her mouth softened before she could prevent it. "You have been practicing. I have been listening." That answer entered gently, because it did not ask to be praised. Isolde signed. Her hand was steadier now than it had been on her first morning at Mallowden, though the old weakness still waited under exertion and cold. She did not mistake steadiness for cure. She had begun to respect her body more honestly, because Leopold had stopped treating it as rumor. After the papers were sanded and sealed, he asked, "Which room shall be reopened next?" She looked toward the covered pianoforte. The music room had never been fully restored. It had served as office, witness chamber, refuge, and tribunal. Its old purpose had waited beneath sheets while truth took precedence over beauty. "This one last," she said. "Last? Yes, it was the first room that listened. It should be the last room changed." He accepted that with a small nod. "Then where first?" "The east sitting room, Mrs. Barden says the morning light there is good enough for mending. Mrs. Fenlow says it is good enough for receiving. Thomas says the accounts are too far from the strong box if we continue to use this room. Everyone has an opinion now. And does that please you? More than silence." By dusk, the rain had cleared. The clouds drew back in long grey folds, and Mallowden's windows gathered the remaining light like opened eyes. Servants moved through the lower rooms, trimming wicks. One by one, lamps glowed along the front of the house. Not extravagantly, not wastefully, honestly. Isolde stood in the hall with the cracked porcelain window lamp in her hands. It had returned that morning from a craftsman in Winchester, repaired not to hide the break, but to honor it. A fine gold line ran across the swallow's wing where the porcelain had once split, turning the fracture into flight. Leopold came down the stairs without hurry. When he saw the lamp, his face changed with such quiet tenderness that Isolde looked down before he could see how deeply it moved her. "He did well," Leopold said. "He did not pretend it was never broken." "No, you asked for that." "I did. Of course you did." There was affection in the words and respect beneath it. Together they climbed to the upper front window of the music room. Isolde carried the lamp, but Leopold carried the oil and taper because partnership, she had discovered, could be practical without becoming small. At the sill, he paused. "May I?" he asked, holding the taper ready. Isolde smiled then, fully enough that his breath caught. "Yes, light it with me." His hand joined hers around the taper, not covering, only accompanying. The flame passed to the wick. The repaired lamp caught, flickered, then steadied. Below it, every lower window shone across the wet lawn and the darkening avenue. Mallowden no longer looked like a house awaiting judgment. It looked like a house expecting someone loved. Leopold stood beside her, close enough for warmth, not close enough to claim what had not been offered. "I thought I needed a quiet house," he said. Isolde looked out at the lamps below. "You needed a house that would answer when you came home." "And you?" She turned toward him. "I needed a home where my weakness was not used as a lock." He bowed his head over her hand and did not kiss it until she turned her fingers in permission. His lips touched her glove, briefly reverently, then released. "I love you still," he said. "Not because you saved Mallowden, not because you forgave me more than I deserved, because you are Isolde, and every room is truer when you enter it." Her heart answered before pride could arrange a defense. She placed the lamp safely on the sill, then took his hand. This time she was the one who drew him nearer. "Then come home honestly," she said, every day, every day. She rose on the smallest lift of her toes and kissed him, gentle, chosen, unobserved by anyone but the lamp, the house, and the rain-bright windows below. His hand remained still until hers tightened around it, and only then did he return the kiss with the restraint of a man who had learned that love was not proven by taking more than was given. When they parted, Isolde rested her brow for one quiet moment against his shoulder. No one called it weakness. No one called it display. Outside, the repaired porcelain lamp shone in the highest front window, its gold-lined crack bright as a path through darkness. Beneath it, Mallowden glowed room by room, no longer empty, no longer silent, and no longer waiting to be told whom it was allowed to welcome.